Good evening. Thank you for coming to your city council meeting. My name is Paul. I'm the mayor. First thing we're going to do is remember to turn off our cell phones. Secondly, we're going to acknowledge that the land where we're doing our work and raising our families and living our lives was inhabited long before the white people arrived, and it's a long history and there's a lot of details and many conversations, but if we quit talking about it, we're going to quit talking about it. Then we're going to pledge allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. Do we have any agenda additions or corrections, Abigail?
No, Mayor, we have no additions or corrections.
In that case, I understand that there's a group of young people here to talk to us. Thank you so much. I think it's Olive. Am I right? Good. That's perfect. Do that. Stand there, Olive. Is it Revel, Zaid, Jackson, and Peyton? Round of applause. What I think is true is that 90% of what gets done by people who show up. So thanks for showing up. Now, do you have something to say to us this evening? Great. So you see this desk right here where there's a little glowing green circle? That's the microphone. So come on up close to that and tell us what you'd like to tell us. And, you know, it is time limited. So do you have kind of a plan for how much you're going to talk? Awesome. Proceed.
I'm nothing. I'm Olive. I'm Zaid. I'm Jackson. We are the Galaxy Narwhals. We are a Lego robotics team. We build and program robots to do Lego missions and compete against other teams. We also have to do a project that identifies a problem and comes up with a solution. We need to try to use the first Lego Leave core values for the whole time. The values are teamwork, inclusion, impact, fun, discovery, and innovation.
This year's project theme is oceans. We are focusing on ocean pollution. We are trying to reduce pollution in the Columbia River because the Columbia flows to the ocean.
We chose this project because it will make a local impact while it still greatly benefits the ocean. Also, if people know that the Columbia drains more water into the Pacific Ocean than any other river in North and South America, they might understand more about why keeping our water clean is really important. We've also finished our first one of these on the new school's parking lot storm drain.
We would like permission to paint 5 city drains before December 15th. Thank you for your consideration.
Well done, you guys. Thank you so much for coming. What's going to happen now is we're not going to vote on that right now, but we'll follow up with staff and maybe your parents, and we'll follow up with you. Okay?
Yep.
Good job. Oh, so chance to migrate. Neat. Now, I don't think we have any other business from the audience. Did anyone else sign up to speak to us this evening? Are we doing Dustin? Nope. We will proceed to our first order of business is presentations, and we have a follow-up from an item we worked on a little while ago. I believe the chief is here to talk to us about vehicles in the public right of way.
Good evening, members, council, and mayor today. So what we're bringing back today, August of 2023, 28th of August, you guys passed the ordinance 2078 in regards to the 168-hour parking rule. And part of that is you wanted to see how it's working. And so today we're actually gonna be presenting, and exciting thing about it, it's not gonna be me. We got Jenny in the house, our parking enforcement. She's actually the one that boots on the ground, her and Marty enforce the 168-hour rule. I thought what better than to have the people that actually do it day in, day out, not only presenting what's going on, but also the questions you might have, or maybe some revisions that you might want to see in it. And they're kind of the boots on the ground to let you guys know what's going on. So Jenny, Marty.
First of all, on the way up, Jen,
Yes.
thank you for being the front line out there. I can only imagine the war stories from your job.
Don't deal with a lot of terrible people. Most people are extremely kind. In 4.5 years, I can count on one hand how many people have been unbearable. So
Right.
it's not been bad. Most people that visit Hood River are actually very kind and understanding. So, but thank you for your sympathy, and thank you for letting me follow up after a bunch of cute kids. That's time. So for those of you that don't know, my name is Jennifer Kendall. I've been doing parking enforcement for the city of Hood River since April of 2020. I get the honor to work with the city's finest. I love my job regardless of what bad rap a meter maid or parking enforcement might have. And as Chief mentioned, we took this on last October, the 168-hour rule. Let me explain to you how we dealt with vehicles that were parked for a certain amount of time before. Before, we only were stickering and ticketing vehicles if they fell under the abandoned, unlicensed, or disabled category, or if they were a RV trailer, a boat trailer, something like that, parked on the public right of way. How we would deal with that is if they had expired tags, we knew they didn't have current insurance, or they had flat tires, or a neighbor had complained about that had been there for an extended amount of time. We would virtually chalk the vehicle with our handheld device, which includes taking a picture of that vehicle, documenting where the air stem was on one tire, document the license plate and the location. And then after a certain amount of time passed back, then we would check it and then go through with the process. The problem where we saw a need for a change for that was vehicles that didn't fall under that abandoned, unlicensed, disabled category being parked for a long time, where people were using our public right of way as a parking lot. And that caused problems with cleaning the streets, that caused problems with rotation of having parking available in certain areas. And so, and people would call and complain and say, this vehicle's been parked outside of my house for months. And I would say, well, it's insured, it's registered, and it looks like a drivable vehicle, so my hands were tied. So this allows for movement of these vehicles. It allows for the streets to be cleaned and for people that have a problem with vehicles being parked out in front of their house to have a leg to stand on. So now, with that new adoption as of October last year, we are able, we receive complaints about vehicles, and we also patrol the streets and identify vehicles that have been parked for longer than 168 hours. And our process now is if it's a complaint or we see it ourselves, we our first goal is education. So we'll sticker a vehicle, leave a warning ticket and a copy of the code. That way, that gives the registered owner, the owner of the vehicle, the opportunity to learn the code, because we can't assume that everybody knows that. And that's always our #1 mission anyways. And once that vehicle reaches the 168 hours, we do the same chalking process now. Now we send out once we get to that point, we send out a certified letter and to the registered owner. We have one of the patrolmen, patrol officers run the vehicle and try and contact a registered owner to hopefully come to a resolution with them without getting to the point of towing the vehicle. That's usually our last resort, is what we want to do. We want to be able to find a solution without having to tow, and that's most often or not, it doesn't happen very often because we're usually able to find a solution. I did include in the packet some graphs on how many vehicles have been stickered, ticketed. Majority of those are receiving warnings, as you can see in the graphs. So most of the time they're just getting a warning and being educated on what the new code is. And then the ones that aren't getting warnings are probably people we've dealt with multiple times. And we know that they know the code, and so then they're getting an actual ticket. And what else did I want to tell you guys about? And the issue before that we ran into where we saw a need for change was when we were talking before and documenting that air stem, a loophole for the person wanting to keep their vehicle on the street was that all they had to do in order to stay there was move that air stem just the tiniest bit. And so it wasn't solving the problem. And with the new code, they're required to move at least 2 city blocks after that 168 hours or before that 168 hours is reached. So it creates more movement. It allows them to move far enough away that the streets are open for cleaning and out of the eyesore. Yeah. I think that's it. Marty, do you have anything to add to that?
The only thing I would add, sorry, Marty, because we're on Zoom.
Oh, sorry.
Thanks. The only thing I would add to that, one of the situations that we're running into is the 168 hours is great. It works for us. However, we have to go through a process as required by the state before we tow vehicles. So even though we have the code and the vehicle has violated the 168-hour rule, we can't just arbitrarily tow. We have to get a hold of the owner, or at least attempt to do our due diligence to get a hold of the vehicle owner before we can tow. And with the mail, sending it by registered mail and first class mail as required, you're adding on another week or two before we get something back. So we might want to look at maybe reducing the hours so that we can be a little bit more productive in a quicker time period to get the vehicles off the street, especially during the winter weather when we have the snow and the plows are having to go around and weave in and out of the vehicles. It not only causes a hazard for the drivers of the plows, but also, you know, you're creating basically an obstacle course for people to drive through to get to and from on their own street.
And for what that looks like, sometimes a vehicle is parked already for a week by the time we get the complaint. Then we chalk it for the week, so that's already 2 weeks, and then we're waiting almost sometimes 2 weeks for a return from our certified letter. So then it's now already there a month. So there is a delay. The problem for us is that it looks to the person complaining that we're not doing anything, because that, you know, I complained 3 weeks ago and this car is still sitting here. So we do try and keep them updated on where we're at in the process, and that it is a process, because you know, as I explain it, I'm like, you don't want a city where you call a vehicle and we go get a tow truck to protect yourself. You don't want that, you know.
Would it
So
help if we made you like a little info card that was like, look, there's a couple
Here's
of
the
steps
process.
here and here's where we're at, like, to reassure like the homeowner.
yeah, I mean, I feel like we're pretty good at communicating that with when we do receive complaints. So it's pretty, we have a pretty open communication with them. And
Most people are understanding when
Yeah.
we explain the process to them.
yes,
Just like most people are understanding when it's like, oh, I better move my car.
yes,
Not everybody takes it to the.
yes.
Correct.
Questions, Joe, Mark?
Thanks. Were there any stories of where there was a legitimate, you know, when we debated this and set the, made the ordinance update, there were some concerns of the people that rightfully expected to be able to park on their block kind of thing. Have you seen any complaints where a car that shouldn't have been moved on was moved on?
One of our problem areas is up near the apartments off of 8th and Pacific, where people that live at the apartments only are allowed, I think, 1 parking space per apartment. And some of those people are, you know, a 2-parent home or a 2-driver home, and they don't have a second place to park the vehicle. And so their vehicles are on 8th Street and sometimes don't move enough to stay out of compliance. Or in compliance, and so that I would say that's one of our main areas that we have that issue, and we've talked about talking to the apartment complexes and seeing about how they can make more spaces, or how that would work for them.
A lot of the vehicle owners are just swapping out their vehicles. We told them that, you know, what we're looking for is that the vehicles are moving. We're not necessarily looking for 168 hours, oh, you didn't move.
Right.
Just show that the vehicles are being rotated out, and usually that makes everybody happy.
So,
Thanks, and thanks for being here.
course.
Yeah, I know we were really excited to hear the output of this, so please feel free to continue to, give us feedback about what you think would work better. A couple of things that came to my mind, and one you've addressed already, is sort of the procedure. I spend a lot of my time down at my office on industrial, and I know there's been some vehicles down there that have been sort of camped out for a while, and that sort of thing, and that's been addressed, which is great. But also, like, come to find that, yeah, it's like, by talking to some of those individuals, yeah, it takes a while because we have to, they have to send letters and everything. So I sort of got, made aware about that. So I think that's interesting. So I guess when it comes to the initiation piece of that, seeing that there's, complaints that you're receiving and those that are initiated by you. So, the complaints we're receiving, that's sort of something we heard a lot of people concerned about. I didn't see a lot of that in there. I saw a little bit more about police initiated, than I maybe expected to. Just because I didn't have a notion of that. But what prompts you? Do you do rounds in those particular areas, or is it part of your day-to-day now where you do that, or?
It's so I do most of my job is foot patrol downtown in the downtown corridor, and then but I also do in the vehicle, I'll go uptown. And what will catch my eye mostly is if there's vegetation growing around the vehicle. I mean, it's not a big town, and I've grown up here, so I'm pretty familiar. So yeah, mostly just things that catch my eye, especially if it's like close to someone's driveway, or I can, it's obvious when a car hasn't moved. There's pine needles, there's stuff growing around it. So it's easy for it. And most of that is just getting people educated on what the code is. Because 9 out of 10 times those people have been parked there because they don't know they're supposed to move it. So, but I would say that's the main thing, is just our vehicle patrol uptown, is because you're not going to find people downtown that have parked more than, a day. I mean, that catches our eyes really quick.
Right. Yeah, and I think that puts a lot of the fears, I think, should be alleviated sort of from the public, that, the police are just gonna go out and look for every car that's been parked and keep meticulous notes, and I think all of us at the time thought, there's no way you'd have the bandwidth to do that.
Right.
So yeah, to your point, it sounds like, there's a lot that maybe have been there for weeks. There's signs of that, then you start tracking it, et cetera, and that's how that comes to fruition.
For sure.
Okay.
And then from my perspective, a lot of my stuff is code enforcement, working with the planning department and going out and investigating various different code violations. And again, like Jennifer stated, you start noticing, okay, I've been up here 3 times now. Over a 3-week period, that car hasn't moved. And then you pay a little bit closer attention.
Right. And so I guess other than the 72 hours sort of, or lower reduced sort of hour suggestion, are there any other suggestions that you would have that would make this easier to implement, or easier in any way?
Off the top of my head, that's the only thing that I've been able to identify, is the fact that we have to follow certain steps by law before we can just arbitrarily tow and impound somebody's vehicle. I mean, with the code the way that it is now, we have been able to clean up several areas in town, which people are really happy about.
Great. And I guess last question, or maybe this is a question for Abigail, is there a way for us to understand sort of the state procedural aspect of this, just to understand, what they have to go through to get everything sent?
Sure, we can maybe write something up and send that to you later, just to summarize that.
Okay, thank you.
Megan and then Mark.
Thanks for coming. I just wanted to touch on, I think one of our other concerns when we were building this was, potential staff time, both for a city manager for exemptions and I think of course for you. And so can you talk about like, how much time is this? Is it taking time away from other things that you think are more valuable, or is it feeling pretty manageable?
It feels manageable. It's part of my regular routine is to, if things are slower in the downtown area, then I'll go uptown, or if I received a complaint uptown, I'll just make sure and do like a full round. So it hasn't added anything. Honestly, it actually has alleviated some stuff, because people have cleaned up areas that now we don't have to worry about as much, and we just have to check in once in a while there. And then I think the exemption, we had a permit that we were going to do for people that needed it, and I don't think we've even had anybody inquire about that. I know.
I can respond to that. We've had, I've experienced 2 requests that have come to me, both residents looking for basically long-term storage, which was not our intent. When we talked about having a permit or an exemption, it was about somebody going on vacation or somebody having family. These were folks who wanted to permanently kind of own a parking spot on the street. And so for both of those, I think consulted with you both and declined that request, but also offered Jen and Marty up as if you'd like to talk to somebody about different options, here's a resource for you. So I haven't heard back from either, but they were pretty clear cut to me, but those only took a
That was
couple
one of
minutes
the
to
options
really.
we offered the tenant at the apartment
Mm,
complex,
mhm,
rotate
yep.
out his vehicles.
That
And he
was
was
one of
very
them.
happy with that.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, so along the lines of both Doug and Megan, when we adopted this code, it was like, we make it 3 days, we make it a week, yeah. And I think you've answered the question, but just asking directly, if it was modified to be 72 hours, 3 days instead of a week, would that just drive you guys nuts or is?
No, and I think that our city actually has one of the higher tolerance for it. I think Oregon City is a 24 hours where before you get marked for towing, and it's like a very fast process. So we actually have a really high tolerance and a long waiting period. So 72 hours wouldn't be crazy. And we're already used to the 72
Correct.
hours with RVs, boats, trailers. So it's not a new thing for us.
So okay, thank you.
Yeah, of course.
There's kind of an interesting middle step I'm realizing in this, which is the neighbor doesn't get cranky until it's been there a while.
Right.
And
Correct.
so it's not like we're all out there looking like, so when they've been seeing it, then they call you, then the clock starts. And so we wouldn't want to deluge you with like too many.
And I've noticed that it's not so much a nuisance for them, but more people are concerned about why has this vehicle been here? They're not concerning about it being a stolen vehicle. So it's not necessarily people are just like complaining about their neighbor. It's more of like a safety concern and a crime concern. And I think I've only ran into that one time where it actually turned out to be a stolen vehicle. So it's not very common, but I understand their concern. And so it's easy to address.
Any other questions for the, Ben?
You mentioned snow plowing and, the challenges of getting around vehicles in that situation. I know that on some of the streets, like when I say Cascade or 12th, there's signs that say like, in snow emergency, if it snows more than 2 inches or something like that. How does the process vary in terms of, say there's a vehicle that's not following the rule in that kind of situation versus this? Do you still have to go through this rigmarole of notifying?
Not so much this certified letter. I've never had someone not move after being ticketed twice, and it was on on Oak, right near Egg River. And a vehicle had been parked there. So once a vehicle accumulates 4 unpaid tickets, they're available, or you're able to tow them. Do you still have to do a certified? I've never got to that point. So
With snow emergency vehicles, our snow emergencies declared by the city manager gives us a little bit more leeway to where you can tow because it's creating a hazard. And in those particular cases, you're not restricted as much because you're removing a hazard from the roadway.
And that's only in like those designated snow areas. It's not.
Not necessarily, sir. If they are parked anywhere causing a traffic hazard during a snowstorm, you'll get people that can't get their cars off the road, basically going up State Street, heading home because they don't have the proper tires or equipment on their car. Those you need to get out of the roadway. So law enforcement has leeway to tow those vehicles to a safe area.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks for the update. Thanks for the good work.
thank you.
Next is Kevin on hazardous waste.
Thank you, Mayor and councilors. You'll find a cover sheet and supporting information in your packet on page 12 about the Tri-County Hazardous Waste and Recycling Program. Tonight, you'll receive a general update about the program as well as some state legislation. This is an opportunity, obviously, for you to ask some questions and provide some feedback. I've been the city's representative on the Tri-County Program Steering Committee for a number of years. Roadshows like this were common prior to the pandemic, an annual visit to each of the partner jurisdictions to provide an update. And I really appreciate getting this back on track. With that, please welcome Kelly Husley Glover, our director of the program and Wasco County's Planning Division Director, as well as Wasco County Commissioner Steve Kramer and the chair of our steering committee. I think we're going to get started tonight with, is it Christina Fiebig that's going to kick it off with the presentation tonight? Okay, great, thank you.
Is it on here? Thanks, Kevin. Thank you, counselors, for having us, and Mayor for having us here tonight. We really appreciate the opportunity. We've got a brief presentation. All three of us are going to get a chance at the mic today, and we'll have us an opportunity for questions. So, Christina, I'll go ahead and advance this.
Thank you, Council, for having us here tonight. So the Tri-County Hazardous Waste and Recycling Program is a 3-county, 9-jurisdiction program that provides hazardous waste services and that we have been supplying for 2 decades here in the region. The service is for households, small businesses, and ag producers in order to help eliminate hazardous waste such as pesticides, chemicals, and other dangerous materials in our waste shed. The core of the program is the hazardous waste, but in addition, we also do recycling education along with sharps disposal and Freon appliance subsidies disposals, including e-waste disposal in our rural locations. And yes, I will take what Kelly
tells you. Christina. So last year, we're in the middle of our collection cycle. The events go from about April until November. So tonight we have last year's number. Last year, over about 19 events, we collected over 200,000 pounds of hazardous waste in the Tri-County service area. And that includes paint items, but also pesticides, fuels, petroleums, light bulbs, batteries, really runs the gamut of materials. Our events are held, we have 3 main events per transfer station. So we have 3 here in Hood River at the Hood River Garbage Transfer Station, 3 in the Dalles, and then we do rural events for to service all of our 9 members, 9 jurisdiction members. So they can be at firehouses, other types of public facilities, and we've been doing that consistently, again, for over 2 decades. One of the things I want to make sure that citizens are aware of tonight is that several years ago, in response to citizen concerns about, specifically at Hood River Garbage, concerns about safety and the queues that sort of happen, if you've ever attended any of our events, you know it can get pretty backed up there. We actually instituted a registration program, and we trialed that during the pandemic. It's been tremendously successful to really reduce safety hazards and risks with traffic. So want to make sure citizens are aware we do require registration ahead of those large events. In addition, for our ag producers and our small businesses that we also service with both at our hazardous household events, but also at separate events. We also, in concert with DEQ requirements, require 1 week in advance application to be signed. So there is a little bit of paperwork involved. Households, it's usually just a quick click through some forms, but want to make sure citizens are aware that we are still requiring those registrations. One cool thing that we did last year, we got a grant from the Oregon Department of Agriculture to do some special projects in reaching our agricultural producers. And we heard really loud and clear from the agricultural community that they had an issue with disposing of triple washed containers, which normally store pesticides. And so we were able to contact with the support of DEQ and of course that grant from Oregon Department of Agriculture a company called Agriplast that's housed in the Willamette Valley. And they came up and actually held an event with Tri-County support. And we had a minimum of 1,000 containers. We far exceeded that with just 12 producers on over 3,000 containers. So it was a very big success, and we've made that connection with Agriplast so that that will be available to our ag producers in the future. One thing that most folks are familiar with, if you've lived in our Tri-County Service District for any number of years, is we send out 2 DEQ required newsletters every year. One is about this time of year, usually comes in the mail in November. That promotes recycling, gives education about how recycling may have changed in our service district. So things that you can recycle, things that you can't. We also advertise our Sharps program, where to dispose of meds safely. We try to promote our current subsidy for appliances with Freon. It's just $10 to take those to the transfer station, which is a great deal. And then in March, we sent out an additional newsletter that showcases all the hazardous waste collection events that are coming up. So most residents, when they come to our events, are reporting this is where they hear the information because it comes directly to them in the mailbox. And then Chair Kramer, would you like to say a few words about legislation?
Thank you, Director. Mr. Mayor, council members, thanks for having me tonight. Appreciate it. Senate Bill 582 came about in 21-22. It is the Modernization of Plastic Pollution Act, and we're going to try to get plastic out of our environment. It's going to take us a while, but we're still working on that. So I've been appointed to this ORSAC. It's the Oregon Recycling System Advisory Council. It's 17 members, and we work hand in hand with producers, haulers, all of the folks that are involved with this program. So basically what it is, it's modeled after Paint Care. It's modeled after the e-cycle program. It's a manufacturer or a producer responsibility organization that will pay for end of life. So through the process, we have a company called Circular Action Alliance. They're out of Canada. And we're in draft 2 of their plan, which is to be implemented July 1st of 25. It's a lofty goal. I don't think we're going to make it, but we're going to try. The draft 3 version will come out this fall. And we're moving forward on all of that. My contact information is in here for you to call me offline so that I can bore you with the details of all of this as we move through it. It's quite a lift for us, but we at our program are going to hold off for the time being on how we proceed with our recycling. Director Housing Glover will talk a little bit about the management plan moving forward in our IGAs, because there's some work that we have to do within our 9 jurisdictions to allow us to subsidize recycling. So we've got some work to do. There's a little bit of legislation between the 9 of us. So that will be coming in the future once we see some rollout from this measure and how it's going to play out. And then the exciting one that we're working on for the 25 session is we're after a battery PRO as well, Extended Producer Responsibility Organization as well. So because we all know that the alkaline batteries that we all use are not hazardous material, but they all show up at our hazardous waste events. So we're trying to move that out of the stream, as well as Paint Care. Latex paint is not hazardous. But as you saw on the first slide, we're collecting over 66,000 pounds for somebody else. So a lot of work to do, and happy to visit offline so that I'll let my team finish up this presentation, and we'll move forward. And thank you for your time tonight. And I'll be available for questions after the finish of presentation.
Thank you, Chair. So we're really lucky to have Chair Kramer as the steering committee chair. He has a lot of passion and knowledge for this topic. So if you're ever wondering what's happening in the recycling space or the hazardous waste space, we do track legislation as part of our program, but Chair Kramer is actively involved with a lot of these legislative momentum. And so he's a really good resource for not only us, but for all of our IGA partners. As Chair Kramer mentioned, you know, we've been moving forward with this program for over 2 decades, and our founding documents have not been revised. So our IGA is from 2003. The management plan that really created our program is from 2002. So things have moved substantially, particularly in the last 5 years in the recycling and hazardous waste space. Part of it is this extended producer responsibility, but it's also just shifting consumer habits. The way we do business is different. So staff has identified a need to really look at these documents and give them some updates, including giving us a little bit more flexibility with what we do with recycling. So our steering committee has really advised that we hold off doing a grand scale management plan update until we start to see how the Recycling Modernization Act really impacts our program. But we want to make sure this opportunity to put a flea in your ear that this is something that we've really prioritized over the next couple of years to kind of take a look at with our partner jurisdictions to move this program forward into the future. I want to conclude, for those of you who this may be the first time, as Kevin said, pandemic really killed our road shows. We're really looking forward to doing this, getting back on the schedule of doing this annually. But for those of you who don't know what your responsibility as local government is for our program, the most critical thing that you can do, in addition to supporting our message and helping us get the word out there, is the appointment that you make to our steering committee. And Kevin has served you very well over a number of decades. He has a long institutional knowledge about our program. He's very passionate about it. He does excellent work. He always volunteers for our subcommittees, which is really outstanding. We really appreciate that. We do have quarterly meetings. So if you're ever interested, you're able to attend them if you'd ever like to come. We've gotten them down to about an hour, I think, the last couple of years, which is great. In addition, we have some subcommittees that Kevin has served on for a number of years that look at our work plan and our budget. So the steering committee is the first stop for looking at budget that then goes through the Wasco County process. And then, of course, we work with partners, other types of city staff to help promote the programs and opportunities that we do. And that partnership is really critical because nobody knows their jurisdiction, their constituents, their customers, as well as the folks who live and work here. So we really appreciate that partnership. The other thing that more formally that we get involved with, particularly with staff, is there are some annual DEQ waste shed reports that we help staff put together in conjunction with our very strong partnership with Waste Connections, which is just really been a huge asset to the program and continues to be. So I want to encourage folks to reach out to us at any point in time, and citizens, same thing, citizens who may be listening. We have a standalone website, tricountyrecycle.com. That's where you can find information about our events. We have the portal to register for events. We've also got lots of really helpful information about green cleaning and what's hazardous waste and what can be recycled and ways to reduce consumption. So if folks are looking for really good local information, that's a really great hub. Christina's been working very, very hard on elevating our social media profile as well. So working on lots of youthful videos that talk about all kinds of topics for how to reuse items, what we can actually recycle here in the Tri-County region. So I really encourage folks to like and follow our social media pages. You'll find a lot of really great information, plus reminders about when our hazardous waste collection events come up. And as Chair Kramer mentioned, he's included his contact information. Such a huge asset to our program, has a lot of program history, also knee deep in legislation. So if you're curious about what's hot, what's going on at the Oregon legislature, he's such a great contact to reach out. And with that, I will conclude my remarks, but I'm happy to answer any questions that the council has at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for your good work. Mark.
Thanks. We're waiting to be able to sign up for the November drop off, so that's good. I think the answer is next July we'll know, but you know, we have recycling pickup at our houses, and if there's gonna be a change to that, the city needs enough runway to educate whatever changes are. And then the other thing is that there is this private group that's doing type sorted collection stuff, and it would be nice if it was formalized. I don't know if that's something you guys are working on, but I would encourage you to expand the number of things that we can recycle as able. So I expect that might be part of this get plastics out of the environment too. But mostly, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Right, and there will be, at this point, there will be no interruption to your service at curbside. The state uniform list will come out after the next round of rulemaking, which will sometime be November, December. So we'll have the unified list that every community in the state will collect. And there is a PRO acceptance list that the depots that they will set up outside of the certified depots that we have now. And so our conversation next week, one of our major topics in the plan is on-ramping some of those issues, some of those materials onto the state list so that we can grab the low-hanging fruit, so that we can get that to end market, so that we can turn around and put that resource back into the program so that it's not costing us anything. So that's the major goal. I had a conversation with 2 of our DEQ representatives this morning, and so that's where they're at. So no interruption at this time, and only working on expansion of services. So that's the goal of the ORSAC and DEQ at this point. So.
Great.
Thanks. One of these questions might be a simple answer. I assume on your website you have all of your hazardous waste pickup days and non-hazardous waste pickup days listed and it's sorted by waste type and that sort of thing. Is that accurate?
So I'm not sure I understand your question.
Like,
we're not the garbage company. So that confuses a lot of citizens. They get confused about that.
You have information on your site, hazardous waste event days.
Yes.
And people are bringing paint or aqua batteries or those sorts of things to those events.
Yes.
You do not want those sorts of things at those events.
Yes.
I would imagine that we would want to put that information out there and say, there are different events to take your paint to.
Yes, well, so actually, there are locations in every jurisdiction, like private companies that actually take paint care products. So we do broadly advertise that. Here in Hood River, it would be Swell City Decor, Hood River Supply, and Gorge Rebuild Center. So we do try to really heavily promote that. And I appreciate the question.
Yep, that was my question, and related to that, anytime you have those events, it would probably be helpful if we were able to communicate that to everyone or help facilitate that communication and say, here are the events that are going on, here are the things to bring, here's what not to bring, but in case you have paint, here's where you can take your paint, for example.
We actually, it's part of the registration sign up sheet. So we say, are you only bringing this here? You can actually take it here any day of the week that those businesses are open.
Sure.
Yeah. But it's a great point. And any ideas that anybody has about other ways to spread that news, we're happy to listen to it, because that has been a big hurdle for our program, is to discourage folks who think they need to come to this special event that only happens 3 times a year just for paint. We really want them to know that they can go any day of the week.
Thanks.
And the other follow-up, if I may, Counselor, to your other recycling program, we need to talk offline. So.
2 of my favorite digital media things are the National Park Service, unbelievably funny and cool. And then the Australian subway system sang that song, Dumb Ways to Die, unbelievably funny and educational. So put that in your big digital brain.
A couple of comments and a just broad question. First of all, I would venture to say that the newsletter is probably the way you're getting the most. It's a great newsletter. I throw stuff away all the time, and for whatever reason, every time I see the Tri-County logo and everything just feels very nice. I open it up, I can see everything. The pictures are great. So just bravo on constructing a good newsletter in a paperless world, right? So kudos to that, and thanks, Kevin, for doing this for so long and being representative. I guess the broad question is, and we see a lot of presentations, right? And we always ask, what can we do? You laid that out very clearly about what participation is from us. Is there anything that wasn't maybe captured in you can think of from the city of Hood River specifically, or anything to add to that list that wasn't maybe in this type of presentation?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think to Councillor Polson's point, letting folks know that they can take paint care products, so latex paint, any day of the week to those 3 locations here in Hood River. Evangelizing the importance of getting hazardous waste out of the waste stream, and really utilizing this free service. So again, just coming up behind the work that we already do and echoing that is really helpful, because word of mouth actually is also highly rated by our residents as where they hear about this information. So, and you all are fine representatives of Hood River. So I know folks listen to you.
And Abigail, perhaps like this is something we can add to our list of reposting or on our social media, that kind of stuff. Maybe we're already doing that, but just
That would be great. Thank you.
Great presentation.
Right, y'all, thanks again.
Thank you so much,
For those
Council
who
Mayor.
don't know, Commissioner Kramer been out a while and is stepping on to greater things. So thank you for your service.
Yeah, well, thank you too for the work that we've done over the years. I appreciate it. And thank the rest of the council for stepping up, because it's not an easy gig. So, but with that, 12 years of service with this program, 12 years with Mr. Liberty. Mr. Liberty has also 4 years on me on this program. He came to it in 2008 from his recollection. I just want to give a big shout out as director also did, but he's there to help us with subcommittees, and he keeps us on track. He keeps us going. He asks the hard questions, and he is representing this council well. So
Thank you, Kevin. Well done.
thank you all.
Moving on to a public hearing. Am I right, Abigail?
That's right.
I have a script. This is the time scheduled for a public hearing on the findings and conclusions of the System Development Charge Study dated July 29, 24, and prepared by the FCS Group. And Hardenheim Group, we got the SDC, FCS. Council is considering adoption of this study at a future meeting as the SDC methodology for the city of Hood River as required by ORS 223.304. We will now hear the city staff report. Chris.
Yeah.
We're good?
No, stop sharing. Stop sharing.
And Mayor, while they're setting this up, I just want to note we kind of have 2 parts here. One is Doug from FCS will be doing a presentation talking about methodology, kind of the conclusions, and then The second piece is just about how you would like to phase that in. So just want to recognize, you're gonna see actually two presentations here, whether you want to pause in the middle and take public comment, or if you want to wait till the end and take public comment. After all of that, is totally up to you. So.
Great, thank you.
Public hearing, just one of those two pieces?
I think, yeah, I don't know, that's maybe a Dan question. I would say, I think the public hearing really is that first part about the methodology. That's what you're actually addressing today. The second part, we're looking for your feedback, and then we would bring you back something. That said, you may wish to include both parts in the public.
Great, so I have a plan. Carry on, Chris.
Thank you, Mayor.
Great. All right, well, that was my part. So. That's perfect. So let me introduce Doug Gabbard. He had presented the initial work that was going to go into the SDC report. And so that report has been sort of circulated. It's been on our website. And Doug's here to go a little bit deeper into some of the conclusions.
Thank you. Welcome back.
Thank you. You may recall that we had a very elevated conversation on May 28th when we were last here, and I look very forward to what's on your mind this evening. Because none of the numbers and what I'm showing you tonight have changed, they are the same. We're able to do this in a little more streamlined way, but because this is a public hearing, we will still be comprehensive in scope to enter into the record what we need to. And the first thing I need to enter into the record is that I'm not alone here. I am Doug Gabbard, a project manager of FCS, but I am joined online in the ether by my illustrious colleagues, John Ghilarducci, the project principal, and Luke Nelson, senior analyst. And I am delighted that they are sharing this experience. So we're going to remind ourselves what an SDC is and the law behind it. We're going to step through rather quickly the water, sewer, stormwater, and transportation results, and then we'll show you some comparisons. So as a reminder, SDCs are one-time fees. No one gets a monthly bill for an SDC. They're paid at the time of development, or if use is intensified, it can be paid because of a redevelopment. State law allows for 5 different SDCs to be charged: water, sewer, storm, transportation, and parks. You have 4 of those 5. The 5th is charged by your Parks District, the Hood River Valley Parks and Rec District. SDCs are all about capital. They are calculated based upon capital costs, and they are spent on capital. So don't pay for operating costs with SDCs. SDCs include both a future component based on projects and an existing component based upon assets. More about that in a minute. SDCs are for system facilities, not local facilities, not facilities that are sort of specifically benefiting a small group of folks, but rather it's like a share of stock in a larger system. SDCs are defined in Oregon law. They really predate Oregon law as development exactions, but Oregon does have a very careful statute. And also not to be overlooked is that Hood River in your code has law that governs SDCs. And that's really important because the state law does have some areas of flexibility that allow for policy choices to be made. And if you want to take advantage of that, you have to put that into your law, in your code, so that it's reflected there. So we dip our toes into the math now, reminding ourselves that SDCs are just a couple of fractions. First of all, for a reimbursement fee, you have the eligible cost of existing facilities. That eligibility is really based upon the extent to which those existing facilities have capacity for future users. Then you divide that by your growth in your user base. Likewise, for the improvement fee, the fraction looks like this. You have a set of project costs in the numerator. Those project costs are evaluated for the extent to which they provide capacity for future users. We call that eligibility. And those projects have an eligibility percentage applied to them. You end up with a net cost that then is divided by the growth of system demand. You put those two things together if you have both, and you have a system development charge. Okay, So these numbers that you're about to see for your 4 SDCs are unchanged since May, since I was here last. Let me just kind of qualitatively remind you of what goes into these numbers by just gently walking down this table, because all 4 tables are going to look similar. We begin with project costs. You have a list of projects, typically in a master plan, but doesn't have to be. Those projects add up to a certain cost. In this case, it's a little over $52 million. We evaluate each one of those projects for the extent to which they will provide capacity to future users, rather than just replacing like for like, or having a safety improvement, or some other thing that's really going to benefit existing users. And that comes with an eligibility percentage, which we have now aggregated in this table. And the sum of the eligible costs then leads to the eligible project cost, which here is $20.2 million. That's your improvement fee cost basis. Now we're going to make a couple of adjustments. We're going to take your fund balance to the extent that we can identify it as improvement fee fund balance, because that's money that you've already collected for projects. You don't need to collect it again. So we're going to net that out. And we're also going to add into the cost basis any cost of existing facilities if we can document that those facilities have capacity for future users. And so what you have is almost $1 million of that here in the water SDC. We then include an allowance for compliance costs. This is specifically allowed in the statute. It allows you to pay for the folks who help you put your SDC methodology together. It allows you to pay for the accounting that has to be done. There is required accounting that has to be done each year. Those kinds of costs can be covered in the compliance costs. It's really the half exception to the rule that you don't pay for operating costs with SDCs. So all of those add up to a total cost basis, in this case, $20.4 million. Then we have a growth in meter capacity equivalence. That's the customer base. It's expressed in meter capacity equivalence because that's how water demand is measured. We would get that from a water master plan. And doing that division, we come up with a total SDC per meter capacity equivalent of $11,136. Now, this kind of thinking goes for all 4 of the SDCs. And we can take that cost per meter capacity equivalent and put it in a table of all the meter sizes, and the results flow out accordingly once you multiply it by the appropriate factor. So likewise for sewer, you have a total project cost of almost $40 million. And after we make the appropriate adjustments, much smaller reimbursement fee this time, we end up with a total SDC per meter capacity equivalent of $3,699. Once again, we're using those same meter capacity equivalents, which is quite common in wastewater as well as it is with water. And we multiply that by the appropriate factor to come up with the total SDC for each meter size. Turning to stormwater, we had total project costs of over $35 million. Pretty healthy eligibility here, leading to a total cost basis of just over $23 million. No reimbursement fee this time. Very common in stormwater. It's not like, I don't know of anybody who has a bunch of extra stormwater capacity. Please.
Sorry. So this average eligibility number I've been sort of watching.
Yes.
This is our highest one yet. So in sort of more plain English, this means that more of the stuff we do to improve our stormwater is for the next person, for the future.
That's exactly right. Much less replacing like for like.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome. So here for stormwater, the customer base is measured in impervious surface area, which is the gold standard, as you know. And so we have, based upon data the city provided, and we don't always have this, we were happy to get this. So you have 18 million available impervious square feet that you expect over the forecast period So that enables us to calculate a very precise stormwater SDC of $1.29 per impervious square foot. And you can use that on an ERU basis as you do currently. You can also just charge it per square foot for everybody. I'm starting to get ahead a little bit into scaling, but that's kind of a preview of coming attractions. Likewise, transportation, big dollars here, which is absolutely common. It's normal for transportation to have large dollars, especially in the project costs. But transportation projects have a lot of kind of replacement element to them. And so that's why the eligibility here is less than 50%. And so you have a total cost basis and there's no reimbursement fee. That's also quite common in transportation. You have a total cost basis of a little over 135, almost $136 million. Here, the customer base is measured in peak hour person trip ends. I'd love to say more about that, but I won't until you ask. But there's a whole science to that. So we divide that out and we come up with an SDC of $6,153 per trip end, which is not the same as a single family residence. You still have to pump that number through the trip count for each land use, and it's a whole list. But we do have information to share with you.
But fundamentally, the point here is how much more transportation is this house going to generate?
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Thank you.
And the ITE manual, the Institute of Transportation Engineers, they have all kinds of land uses where they have real data. And it's a whole science. Please ask me more about it. So to summarize then, we try to help you make apples to apples comparisons. So on the far right side, we have kind of a typical single family residence, which is the same as the meter capacity equivalent, but for stormwater and transportation, we have to make some assumptions. And it's about $27,224.62, which makes this a great time to remind you that a calculated SDC is not a mandate. You're not legally required to charge what we calculate. I would treat it as a ceiling. Don't go above it. But it is something that as long as you're under it, the law is not going to bother you. So we're on the kind of the cutting edge with this scaling stuff. It's required now in Washington. It's been required now for a year or two. It's not required in Oregon, but we're doing it for impact fees in Washington, and so we have this as a standard now for system development charges in Oregon. We have a pretty good system that we use where we have these tiers that you see, and we have a lot of clients who really don't like the tiers. They would prefer just the formula, which is great because it's more precise. And so all of our SDCs can be translated into a formula. And what the formula would look like, and I should reiterate, this is only for residential land uses. Commercial would be on its separate, on the more traditional fee schedule. But for residential, we can couch all the SDCs in a dollars per square foot with a minimum and a maximum. And that can be your residential SDC. Or if you prefer the aesthetics of tiers, you can have that too. And the tiers don't have to look like this. There's about 1 million different ways you can have tiers.
And the unit of the left-hand column is square feet.
Yes, that is correct. So this is a comparison of what we calculated versus what you currently charge. All of them are up. Stormwater is up the most on a percentage basis, but that's not a mandate. Just as a reminder. And here's every city council likes to see this slide. They find it helpful, and so we want to make sure you have it too. This is all of the jurisdictions that we think could be considered comparable in some way. If you squint really hard, one of the conclusions you will come to is that jurisdictions that have a very large total SDC typically have it because of transportation and to some extent water. Those are the big ones that make the whole thing big. And if you don't have a big transportation or water SDC, you're likely to be more toward the left side of this graph. As a best practice, we recommend indexing SDCs, typically to the construction cost index of the engineering news record. If you do phase in SDCs, we recommend that you suspend the index adjustment during the phase-in period. That's not a legal thing. That's a practical thing, because you can do both the first year. After the first year, you start to lose track of what percentage should be applied to what base. And as someone who has had to think that through, you don't want that. And so I just recommend against it. But that's a practical thing. That's what I got. And I'd be happy to talk about whatever is on your mind.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think I want to make a couple quick notes. Just for everybody's benefit as we sort of walk through this. This is a process. This is a fairly complicated process. It does have impacts with regards to obviously the fees that builders will pay with regards to new development. A couple things. The logical question is sort of why the significant increase from the existing SDC fees, what has changed? I think one is time, just as a sort of to point out, stormwater SDCs have not been revisited since 2007. Transportation SDCs were revisited in 2013. The most recent updates to the SDCs were water and sewer, and that was 2015. So time in and of itself is not a reason. It's also the work behind that has been work that's been done in adopting different master system development plans. So as the city has looked at water, sewer, most recently transportation, stormwater master system development plans, which is in process, these are the projects that are going towards the list that is being developed as far as the SDCs. It's also important to note that if you look at the existing fee schedules for SDCs, you'll notice that there is a fairly high reimbursement component, much higher than the reimbursement component that was calculated in this last study. That's indicative that the development over the past time, since the SDCs have been last examined, the capacity in the system has been significantly used. So the projects that we're looking at are significant additions, right? And the SDCs that are being charged are focusing on, right, these capacity additions as opposed to capacity reimbursement. So that's indicative that, you know, the city is in need of these new projects soon, right, that are going to increase capacity. We did focus on residential development. A lot of the examples that have been shown are the residential development. I just want to make it explicit that this is all new development, right? So there is the you know, sort of a commercial schedule that is also adjusted when these fees are adjusted. And again, the individual unit of measurement is being used as far as what those fees will be. So Doug quickly showed one slide that showed meter size, right? That's for sort of sewer and water. With regards to commercial developments, the larger meter, right, higher SDCs, but residential trips will be used, right, for all commercial projects. So I just want to note that this is not just focused on residential, right? It's all new development. And then the last thing I want to talk to is just the process, what is going to be asked of City Council. So there is the adoption of the system development charge study. Do you agree with what's in it, right? Does it seem like a logical methodology, right? You know, does it properly sort of communicate what would be the maximum defendable SDC, right? So the report in and of itself. And then other aspects of the report as far as the residential scaling that Doug just talked about. The next part is the establishment of what is gonna be the SDC, right? So given the information in the report, right? What will the SDC be? What will the maximum SDC be? How will the city get there, right? Over what period of time? Does it phase in? Does it go right to the SDC, et cetera? That's what we will also discuss after questions. Next.
Thank you, Chris. So, my claim. Jennifer, do we have anyone online who wishes to speak to us about this?
No, Your Honor.
Is there anyone in this room who wishes to speak to us about this? Thank you. Come on up.
Mike Kettler, 3850 Bay Street, Hood River, Oregon. Yeah, I think the only thing I would speak to it is you obviously have a ceiling and a legal limit that they're gonna advise you that you can get to. I think on the process, I would advise you to maybe look at a practical sense of what can the town actually afford, and what can development actually afford, what land you're actually gonna get built in the next, time period in which you'll actually receive funds. And then kind of on the scaling piece is I would advise you to look at the scaling piece, right? Like the biggest problem we currently have in development right now is the unfinanceability of building in Hood River because of cost. So right now, your current SDCs sit at about 65% of financeable on construction financing. If you continue to move that ceiling, you're gonna lower that limit in which the actual bank will lend against your SDCs. You eventually get to a threshold where you're gonna stop people from actually moving forward with projects, which we're already starting to see. Obviously, outside factors, right, like rates and things like that are hurting it, but something like this in a time where development could gain traction, you could actually start to receive funds. You're gonna put a pretty good blockade in that if you don't do this carefully. And so I guess I would advise you, in process to is probably look out, to the community to see what would be the threshold which would stop someone from moving forward with the project, which inevitably stops you from receiving any funds. So I think that'd be my caution is there's obviously a ceiling that they're talking about you can do legally, but at what point do you put the ceiling so high that it's unreachable for the average person trying to finance, construction financing? So
I know you've built a lot in our town, Mike. What are you up to roughly these days?
in City of Hood River or just the gorge in general?
Yeah.
City of Hood River, I think we're just shy of 200, and then between all of our projects, and then gorge, we're at like 350.
350 residences.
In the gorge, yeah.
It's amazing. Thanks for all that good work.
Yeah, well, we'll see. I hope so. But yeah.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
It means a lot coming from somebody with broad experience.
Yeah, and of course, obviously, as a developer, right? Like, I didn't want to just come up with like, oh, I'm super opposed to it. Obviously, we need to increase with time, but I think at some point, that's which I really like the slide of the scale. It's probably harder for you and it's more work. It's probably a little legally harder to do, but I think that is an important threshold, right? Is your cash client. There's a lot of SDCs that a lot of our projects, you can absorb, a 50% increase and be fine, but you get to kind of that threshold where you're relying upon 80% financing and you start to get big ticket items, and usually your soft cost is your hardest ticket item to finance. So if you really leverage on that, that's the beginning into a project. And so that's where you're going to see a lot of like your, median style builds die off because they cannot go through with them financially. So yeah, appreciate the time. Thank you, council, for listening there.
Thanks.
And yeah, thanks.
So that concludes the public testimony. Council will now deliberate, which includes questions for Chris or consultant or, am I in order, Chris?
Yeah, actually, so, for your deliberation, I'd like to discuss a little bit about the phase-in and what staff is recommending with regards to, what rates are being recommended and sort of over what period of time. So I can do this pretty quickly. I do want to, let me see. Is it showing the right one? Nope.
Need to share. Share.
Good. Excellent. Okay. So Really? There we go. Okay, so just quickly, so what staff is proposing is a 5-year phase-in timeline. Staff is also proposing that over that 5-year timeline, that eventually the SDCs will reach what is the maximum defendable amount that is outlined in the report. So that for water SDC, sewer, storm, and transportation, what the slide that's on the screen references the section of the report and then references what is the maximum defendable SDC, and again, per unit of measurement. The methodology that we are proposing to get there is just sort of a metered scaling over a 5-year period, right? So very, very simply, taking the target SDC, the current SDC, and for year 1, increasing the fee by 20% of the difference, right? And then 20% every year thereafter. So 40, 60, 80, till eventually over 5 years, you're at 100% of the maximum defendable amount. And then from that point forward, it would be increased by the sort of inflation index. What does that look like? Starting with water, the current water SDC, and again, this is per meter capacity equivalent. So for residential, this is the same scale, right? Residential is 1 meter capacity equivalent. The current water SDC is $5,185. The target SDC is $11,136, an overall increase of 115%. But on the 5-year scaling, the first year would increase to around 6,900, and then incrementally thereafter until the 5-year maximum. It would result in a first-year increase of 34%. And then lower increases thereafter.
I got confused because I think on the last slide you said 20, 40, 60, 80, 100. Now you're saying 34, 17, 15, 13 cents.
So it's 20% of the difference for the first year, right? Then 40% of the total difference, right? So the increase, the result is that the first year is larger, right? Because the lower rate and the right.
Thank you.
Sewer, so current SDC is $2,300. Again, this is per meter capacity equivalent. The target is roughly $3,700, and these would be the increases. The first year increase would be $2,641, roughly a 13% increase. Over time, it's roughly a 60% increase in total SDC. Stormwater's current per impervious square footage is 36 cents per impervious square foot. For residential development, we use a 2,500 square foot assumed surface area. So the SDC for a residential unit is $888 currently. The target SDC per impervious square footage is $1.29. And the target SDC for a single family residential would be $3,225. And again, this is the proposed scale. Again, because this is the largest increase, 216% over the sort of 5-year time horizon, the initial increase is pretty significant. It's about 53% increase the first year. Transportation. So current SDC per peak, for peak PM trip, $1,640. For the residential dwelling, it's about $2,400 currently. That is projected to increase to $6,153 per PM trip. And for residential, $9,161. That's a 275% increase over the 5-year time horizon. And again, based on the scaling, the first year increase would be about 55%. And that's the, and again, and then as Doug mentioned, all of this would be subject to the scaling adjustments. And so the scaling runs from the smallest residential development, which would be about 970 square feet, and then in tiers I believe, 970 to 1200, 1200 to 1500, and then upward from there.
And my understanding of the two decisions we have to make tonight are, how high are we gonna go and how quick are we gonna get there?
Yeah.
Is that right?
Well, so, in the packet is our sample resolutions. And so those resolutions, roughly outline the acceptance of the methodology, the acceptance of the scaling, and then proposes the scales that we presented here. If that is acceptable and you would like to see staff move forward with that proposal, we would come back with ordinances, right, for your additional review, discussion, and adoption. So if there are things that you still have questions about, if there are things that you'd like staff to come back and address or address at this meeting, that's sort of where we are here. The objective is to give staff clear direction for coming back for the ordinance adoption.
Great, so let me try that again. First question is, do we accept the report we've received from this consultant? Is that right?
That's correct.
And then the next one is, the second decision is both how high we're gonna go and how quick we're gonna get there.
Correct.
Those are both in the second decision.
That's correct.
I think it's worth, at least for purposes of discussion at some point, talking about the implicit part of this, which is if we don't raise the SDC, philosophically, development pays for itself. We're gonna get behind her and behind her, bridge falls down. I mean, that's the world that a lot of people are in, that we're trying to avoid, that our systems keep up with the growth.
So I want to make a quick distinction, right? Because the bridge is falling down is a maintenance issue, right? I mean, that's that's not what we're discussing here, right? This is sort of new capacity. And so the issue that you would face is that the system development funds, right, do not have the capital, right, to fund new development, right, or to fund the capacity that's necessary for new development, right? So now, planning is not approving projects based on the capacity of development, right? That's what they're assessing SDCs that are used to pay for that development. So the issue that would eventually happen with the city is that it would just not have the money, right, available in its coffers to be able to fund the infrastructure that is necessary for new development. It would have to find alternative ways to pay for that. Right?
Okay, that helped me out a bit. How shall we structure this discussion? Somebody have an idea of where they want to start? We can start with the motions and work backwards. Questions? Great. How about we start with questions? Mark, and then Doug, and then Ben, and then Brad.
Thanks a lot. I think that you think good stuff. The scaling seems super important to me, and it's stuff that we've wanted to do. And I want to know if what we're adopting provides the legal foundation to be able to implement a scale SDC things. I don't see scaling in these tables of the four individual things, which is just a logistics thing, but I think it's really key to provide the barrier management tools that we've talked about doing, and so how do we need to adopt the study such that scaling isn't just an appendix that can be argued whether it's part of it or not, but it's right at the front?
Yeah, that's a great question. Actually, Doug and I just discussed that. And so and while he talks, I'm gonna share the scaling again so you guys can look at it, understand it.
So you would want to make sure that the scaling is in the resolution that you adopt, so that it's clear that someone can point to a developer could point to their line and have some assurance that they know they're being charged that amount, or at least at that rate times square feet.
Yeah, whether it's an equation or a tier, I don't
Exactly.
care, but. If they go, well, I think this is baloney, and they're gonna go back to the thing we adopted, the SDC rationale, and it better be there in a way that's defensible by the city. I guess that's what I'm saying.
Absolutely. That's why we have the notion of a maximum. That we think is pretty important to include in any scaling. Because this all started with Parks SDCs and has kind of expanded from there. Well, Parks SDCs are based on park usage, park facilities are used by people. And so people are kind of your basis for your customer base. And so we found some data that tied square footage to number of occupants. And what we found is that there is a positive correlation, both numbers grow to a point. There is a point at which houses get bigger, but there are no more people, no greater number of people in them. And so for that reason, to be true to the data, to be true to the Nolan and Dolan test that you probably hear about sometimes, it's important to have a maximum above which it doesn't go higher.
I'm just gonna, very quickly, since we've now seen this slide yet again, can we please get square foot on here?
Oh, yeah. That's totally fair. Yes, ma'am.
My school chemistry teacher would be very cranky.
Oh.
Ben and then Brandon was sticking on.
I just to
Completely different questions, so it's.
I wanna add something to finish that question. When we do come back with the ordinance, again, based on conversations with Doug, to your specific point, because we wanna adopt the new SDCs, but we also wanna adopt this methodology. The ordinance will probably be more explicit with regards to what we're adopting as it relates to the existing SDC policy.
My question is very specific, and it's in terms of, I don't know if this was a typo or what, but on page 46 in the packet under stormwater, particularly or specifically under eligibility, the second paragraph under eligibility that mentions the current population of the city as 10,347. And that is not correct. And so if that was used in terms of this formula, then I think that is potentially going to be an issue that needs to be addressed before we finalize this.
We will take a look at that. Yeah, absolutely.
Is there more like 85, 77 or something like that? Yeah. Great.
And this is stormwater, you said?
Double check here. Section 4 stormwater SDC. It's page 46 of our packet. On the system development charge study, it's page 17. Yeah, if it's not being used in the formula, that's much less of an issue. I just want to definitely make sure that the number is correct. Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, we're still under 10,000. I'll stick with my methodology questions for now. Just to refresh my memory, and the basic calculation questions, for the denominator, the denominator is growth.
Yes.
And it has to be growth. It cannot be anything else but growth in capacity.
Growth in demand.
In demand.
Yeah, what'd you have in mind? Yes. Yeah, I get your yes. Yes. Yeah, the number, so conceptually, it's the cost of new capacity divided by the demand that new capacity will serve.
Stuck with growth being the denominator. Just, yes, we're stuck with growth being the number.
Yes,
Yeah, yeah.
say more. I'm interested in what you're thinking.
It has consequences being the denominator mathematically. But I was just making sure that we're stuck with that as the denominator. That's all, as the methodology.
Yes.
State law. Yeah, that's.
Or we embrace that as the denominator, not stuck with.
Well, I'm interested in what, in what the concern is, because maybe I can help.
That's a different conversation.
Okay, copy that.
Don't worry about it. Sticking with methodology, you came to the minimum, this is on page 58 of our packet. The minimum square footage of a single resident occupied residence as being 970 square feet. That was based on census data?
No, that would be based on average occupancy and average size give you a rate of a certain number of people per square feet. Okay, you then use your 8th grade algebra and you solve for one human being.
Draw a regression model.
Or just plain old algebra.
Linear regression model.
Well, it's algebra.
Sure. Okay.
So all that is to say, no, it is not empirical.
Okay.
We didn't go and measure the small houses to make sure there was exactly one person inside. It's a
Sure.
calculation.
My concern is, are we using 970 as the minimum in any way? Are we using 970 as a minimum requirement of a single occupant? As a consequence?
Okay, now that's a great question, because I spoke enthusiastically here about having a maximum charge because the correlation between occupancy and size breaks down at the upper end. I have far less skin in the game on the bottom end. So if you want to have it certainly makes sense. It's very intuitive and easy to explain that your minimum charge would be for a dwelling unit where one person could live. That's pretty easy to explain. But mathematically, if you don't want to have a minimum, just have a per square foot charge with a maximum, I'm down with that. That would be defensible.
Thank you. Those were the only methodology questions I had. Thank you.
Who's next?
Always nice to talk to you, another Doug. Good to see you again. Thanks again.
We are the smartest people.
That's right. Science classes. I knew that was a thing. I guess if I think back to, I think it was slide 15 in your presentation, we're talking about, Astoria to Independence, right?
Okay.
How is there a part of that, the fact that those municipalities have recently made adjustments?
Oh, so much good to say, so much to say about this. And it's all the things that we don't know.
Right.
So what I can tell you is, aside from Hood River, all of these, comparables, depending upon whether you think they're comparable or not, they are based upon what is currently being charged. That's what we know. Here's the things we don't know. When's the last time they updated it? When they did update it, did they take the maximum defensible charge or did they discount it heavily? Are they in the middle of a phase in? When are they due to update it the next time? There's a whole raft of things we don't know about those numbers. And which diminishes, I think it ought to diminish their usefulness, but we know that people want to see them, and so we provide them.
Yeah, just along with that, has growth been inhibited in Independence and not in Astoria, right, is the other question.
Yeah, now you're getting into something that's almost unanswerable, especially if you're trying to pin it on SDCs.
Sure. Last time we talked about tiering, and the methodology for tiering, the capping certainly, but we also talked about why it's not possible to say, incentivize via a scaling, favoring something under a certain amount of square foot, right? Is that correct?
Yeah, we were having such a friendly conversation. But yes, it is important to treat similarly situated developments similarly.
And that, speaking towards the type of housing that we want to incentivize in Hood River, though we, and partially for staff here as well, but just making sure of your understanding of this. So if we were to offer, say, rebates or something like that from the city, to SDCs or something like that, is that illegal?
So now, if you bring money to the table, that forgives a multitude of sins. So if you can bring non-SDC money to the table and pay SDCs on behalf of a developer that you find contributing to public good in some way, you get to do that. So if you can find the money to do that, you get to do that.
Right, and obviously something urban development, that's what we have been discussing. So just to put in the context of this discussion, for developers that are developing housing that's we feel that we need here versus giant houses or et cetera, that's something we are discussing as well, right? So just putting that out there for the context, but also good to hear your perspective on it.
I do want to your point, Todd, I do want to make sure that, so if you look at this chart, and again, this is exclusive of stormwater, because stormwater is calculated based on actual impervious square footage, but
right.
I think that and one, Councilor Paulson, we use these tiers, one for administrative for purposes of administration, but also we thought that this was trying to bolster some of the initiatives that the city is currently sort of pursuing, right? So for example, Will has talked about some of the incentives that he's sort of putting forth with regards to incentivizing, sort of development of a certain size. This is a pretty powerful incentive, right? There's a sort of 52% discount on the SDCs that would be charged to a standard single-family residential development for a house that's under, 970 square feet or under. 40% discount to 1,200 square feet or under, right? 25% discount to 1,500 square feet or under. And this does not currently exist in sort of Hood River's process, right? So part of the methodology, even at the existing SDC rates, is to adopt this methodology that provides an additional incentive towards the type of housing that council is looking to incentivize.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here. Doug, I feel like early in your presentation, you kind of mentioned that city code might need to be updated depending on things we wanted to do, or did I misunderstand that?
Oh, no, I don't have any specific updates in mind. What I wanted to emphasize was that your code language governing SDCs is just as important as the state law. It's really the local code that governs the SDCs here, and there are provisions that you need to have because state law says you need to have it, but there's also room for flexibility in policy issues that you need to have it in your code if you want to take advantage of it. Just here's one specific example. In the state law, it says that there is a certain minimum level of credits that you have to provide if a developer provides a qualified public improvement. There are all kinds of things that you don't have to do. You don't have to make those credits transferable, for example. They can die like airline miles. But if you wanted to make them transferable, the law gives you the flexibility to do that. And that's the kind of thing that you would want to have in your code.
Okay. And I'm assuming from our staffs and everything we've been talking about tonight is obviously allowed. Okay. Great, thank you. And then my other one, I'm gonna ask the question I'm pretty sure I know the answer to lead into it, but if we adopt whatever rate we adopt and then you know, maybe the city is successful at getting some grants for some of the improvements that need to be made. I'm aware, but I'm just gonna ask, like, there's no way to like rebate folks to say, oh, we covered 50% of this cost. Everyone gets a little money back from an SDC they've already paid.
Oh, I'd be careful about doing that.
Okay.
So,
Well, I mean, would that even be legal?
oh, well, I wouldn't say, no, I'm gonna say talk to your lawyer on that. I don't, no, that's not my concern anyway. What I wanna do is I wanna sort of give you permission to realize that every SDC calculation is done from a moment in time looking forward, and the world instantly changes as soon as you adopt it.
Right.
So that kind of thing, if there's a competitive grant, you weren't expecting to get it, so you did not include it as an alternate funding source, but then you get it, that happens all the time.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I guess, yeah, like, this is getting more into the staff's end, but I assume we didn't assume we were getting any grants when we were doing our calculations of the maximum amount allowable cost.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are there, and this is an area I'm not the most familiar with, like, are there grants that would cover this kind of infrastructure?
Potentially.
Okay.
Right, so I think as far as in working with FCS, the assumptions, excuse me, the assumptions that we made. You know, there's the overall sort of project eligibility as far as what builds new capacity, that's an input. We did incorporate things that we know to be true, right? So for projects that we know are going to be undertaken by the URA areas, right? We did not double dip. Right, so, you know, so to the extent that we knew that there was financing available, alternative financing available, that was incorporated with regards to the project budget. We did not make any assumptions moving forward, for example, what percentage of any project is going to be financed by outside financing? What percentage of any project is going to be sort of covered by grants? From an administrative standpoint, the reason that every SDC has its own resolution is because if there is a change of assumption moving forward, right, then we can amend the resolution. It just so happens that this process is looking at all the SDCs at one time. That has not been the case in the past, right, and may not be the case in the future. And so if there are significant changes of assumptions that require revisiting the SDCs, we can do that, you know, sort of administratively by amending the ordinance.
Okay. I think the rest of my stuff is comments, not questions, so thank you.
Okay. Changing topic to stormwater and the impervious square feet. I think it's a question for staff is, are we calculating ISF on a per submittal basis? Is that how that's in some other piece of code that says how to calculate that?
Yeah, we calculate impervious on every lot, especially every residential lot, because you have a max coverage amount. So you have a certain amount that is eligible for calculations such as the building footprint, parking and driveway. They all go into a zoning calculation. So we test for compliance on that. There is some impervious that is not counted. However, it's usually minor as compared to the rest of it. A patio per se.
But I'm wondering if this isn't the path to an LAD type thing where can that calculation include impervious square feet credits for a big tree that's going to suck up just a ton of water? But I think my guess is that's outside of that's a different piece of code, and we can continue with the SDC stuff. I just want to know if there's a path in other code to change how that ISF is calculated.
Doug, did you raise your hand? I couldn't.
No.
Counselor Daniel, I think that's something we would need to study.
Is it outside of the SDC thing? I think so.
I'm thinking, my first reaction is probably include some incentives as well as regulations.
So the first decision to make is
Yes.
this something that should be handled, if it needs to be handled at all, in an SDC or a rate? So that's the first decision. There is a process in the context of a stormwater rate that we often use to calculate credits for developments. And usually we're talking about non-residential that go above and beyond the minimum requirements in your code. So not typically, not even a credit scheme would cover a big tree in someone's yard. If I've understood your question correctly.
Yeah, my sense is that the SDC rationale is fine as is, and then there's an opportunity in other places of how the city calculates that on a per development basis. So I'll just take a note to pass that along, but I think it's very cool.
Or the way I was imagining it is, are there clever pervious schemes that we can do, like, no, my driveway is, has holes in it, or,
There's lots.
There's pervious pavement. I mean, until someone puts a crack seal on it.
And then when we charge the person, we know about that, and we don't charge them for the pervious part, right, Justin?
And we have credits for permeable paver systems when it comes to development. So there is an incentive on how much you can build on an individual lot based upon doing permeable pavers, based on location of your driveway, certain urban designs that we build in, not for credit in a monetized value, but by allowance for more development on the site. So a permeable driveway that comes off the rear of your house, if done in a way that is actually permeable and supportable by engineering, is 50% the square footage. So right off the bat in the zoning code, you have a 100 square foot driveway, it's done with permeable pavers, it's actually counted as a 50 square foot driveway, as an illustrative. That's not a monetized value, that's a development on-site incentive.
Sounds like I'm hearing all of y'all say this is outside of this project. Okay, so questions, deliberation, we're technically in deliberation. Let's set the bar low. The next goal is to decide if we can agree to accept this. Which is half of the project, right?
I mean, based on you looking into that question and if that changes the methodology, or not.
Population.
For the
Yeah,
population.
we'll take a look at it. I'm confident that it's not going to change the numbers, but not confident enough to say, don't worry about it. So we will get to the bottom of it.
Pending the population question, the Mitchell population question.
Yeah, I mean, I think pending that, I don't have any other concerns with the methodology.
Scaling isn't reflected in the motions, so.
Scaling was intended to be reflected. So the ordinance itself adopts the section, the implementation plan, and then the appendix that has the residential scaling. The ordinance will explicitly include that in the outline of the fee schedule. And so the intent was to adopt scaling immediately. And then propose the phasing schedule and the dates of adoption. So the ordinance will be explicit as to that. That was the intent.
So the resolution doesn't define it, but the ordinance would.
I'm sorry, the resolution will, sorry.
Okay, so
Yes.
that'll be a change coming back.
Correct.
So I would entertain a motion.
Do we need to decide tonight or can we wait for the answer?
We can do either.
And are we only talking about this report, or are we now talking about the entire thing?
We're talking about accepting the report, I think. That's what I'm suggesting we're talking about.
The suggested motion combines them though, right?
Yeah, it does. It does.
What do you guys want to do?
I move we only, at this point, accept the report.
So I'm gonna check with the expert people. Is that a meaningful step?
Well, so all right, so this is this process is a little bit clunky, right? So the resolutions that you have in your packet is the example resolution. And what the example resolution does is it accepts the report and proposes a phase-in schedule, and then also proposes the residential scaling.
Great.
And so what staff is looking for at this point is sort of direction as to what changes, if any, would be in the resolution. So the threshold question is are there any fundamental issues with the methodology? You guys, you have raised the potential issue of population. We will check that and confirm that. My takeaway is that there's sort of no other issues right now with regards to the report and the methodology introduced.
Are we happy with Chris having that takeaway? That's great.
Okay.
Okay.
So that leaves sort of two other questions. One would be on the residential scaling, right? If the sort of the proposed scaling that's presented, right, is acceptable, or if there's some other change that we'd like to see to the scaling.
Good, so let's hold right there. That is now the question before us, y'all. How are you feeling about the schedule? Questions or comments?
Can you kill my motion for lack of a second first, please?
Motion dies for want of a second.
Thank you.
Grant had talked about, and I think it's a good idea for SDCs and stuff to not be tiered and let the equation go to smaller number of square feet. For the smaller class, yeah.
So.
Like.
So what's the actual, what would be the actual decision there?
That if I understand Councilor Zangler correctly, and rephrasing appropriately, this would not be putting a minimum square footage on the tiers and
right,
having a per square footage drop down to 0 or some other very low minimum that we define.
And we can do that though, right?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so I want to be clear, just, and Doug, maybe you can correct me. So what that would entail would be that on this chart, the 2,000 square foot home would be defined as the standard, right? Standard single family residential.
The 0%.
The 0%. And then every square foot below that would have its corresponding per square foot discount, right, or reduction.
Okay, so if I'm hearing you right, if I'm hearing y'all right, what you're actually wanting is not tiers, but rather a formula.
That's what I'm hearing also.
Right.
A formula would be in the form of this SDC for residential development is X number of dollars and cents per square foot of dwelling unit, subject to a maximum only.
Is that manageable for Dustin's people?
As long as it's mathematical, we can do the math.
There's two questions on that, and I don't know how often this occurs, but like, so if a project changes, you know, by 3 square feet, somewhere in the middle of it, we have to, I mean, I assume it's an easy calculation, but we would have to change it. Is that a common occurrence? Is that a annoying thing, or?
Oh, yeah, every home addition, we'd charge an SDC upgrade on every single house that came through. You want to add 500 square feet onto your house? There's a mathematical formula to that.
Oh, no, I'm thinking like, you know, from permit to actual, like, adding a square foot doesn't take much change.
Well, if it came out different, we would be doing math. We could end up doing math prior to CO. if it came in at permit and it didn't, if there was field changes and, you know, builder was required to do something else, foundation wall got bigger, whatever, there could be a reckoning of permit fees there.
But let's take note of what Dustin said though about additions. I mean, that is part of the deal when you go with this kind of scaling. Is that you have now the opportunity to capture additional square footage. And, you know, you could make it a policy not to do that. But would that be a good, now you have to wrestle with whether that's a good policy and whether it disadvantages new development, but that's a whole other. But anyway, but I just wanted to take note of what Dustin said.
Well, now you confuse me, Doug. So
I'm sorry.
if we do a tiered thing, we don't get to charge SDCs on additions?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't. If your addition thrust your building into the next level, and that could be 1 or 2 square feet that does that, which is an argument against tiers, I guess. But that would be an opportunity in air quotes to get that incremental SDC.
Okay. Dustin?
I mean, as it is today with a flat fee, an addition that didn't constitute a new dwelling unit it doesn't trigger an SDC. So as for this, probably an implementation, if you permitted a 1,200 square foot dwelling and the permit came in to jump it to a 2,000 square foot dwelling, you would likely, we'd be looking for some sort of offset there. Because now we've gone from one to another. You'd be credited, you know, it wouldn't be just a $9,000 transportation fee. It would be minus whatever credits were paid in. And that's similar how we operate today.
So it's feeling like a rabbit hole, but I'll jump in with the rest of y'all. I have a 1,000 square foot house. I put on a 3,000 square foot addition and moved 9 people in. Clearly, for the point of this exercise, I'm having impact, creating demand.
Yes.
But for additions, we don't charge us.
Today we don't.
Because a dwelling unit is still a dwelling unit.
Yep, thanks.
Okay. And then my second one, sorry, that's a long first one. Having the minimum in this current chart at 970, I understand wanting to incentivize things smaller than that, but I guess I am wondering, like, it feels like there should be some minimum given, you know, one person, whether it's in a 970 or a 400 square foot place, is having presumably a fairly equal impact on these systems. And so there's a benefit from our end of like, oh, if we want to incentivize, 600 square foot homes to get more and denser homes, yay, but like, it doesn't seem like it should just go all the way to 0, which I think was maybe what I heard Grant suggesting. And I might have heard that wrong.
I was just reiterating what Mark was saying. I concur with you that we perhaps shouldn't go straight to 0, and it may make sense to set a floor at some number. What that number is, we should determine what that is.
We're talking about scaling. Doug?
I'm having a hard time understanding what we're attacking with the scaling. Are people building anything lower than 970 square feet?
I live in 780.
Yeah. As an example.
ADUs should be 800 or less. I'm not being flippant. I mean, like, seriously, what's the?
Yeah, the cap at an ADU currently, without some variance or exception because of extenuating circumstances, is 800 square feet. So every ADU we do is still assessed a system development charge, and 800 is the cap at that. So that's one of those kind of regulatory pieces that we see. We do have a class of dwelling units that is built characteristically under 800 square feet. That is assessed a standalone SDC, which today is relatively static.
Yeah, and I would like to just point out the magic, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the magic behind the 970 square feet is that's when the math equates to one resident, right? And so whether the house is smaller or not, right, it's still one resident. And so the idea is rather than sort of have an individual per square foot incremental charge, this is really more tied to sort of a resident scale. Right,
So-
and that's the idea with the tiers.
And thank you, that's what I was trying to get at, is like at some point it doesn't matter anymore, 970 is what it doesn't matter. So we would not be able to defend a logical system where we're now in, you know, putting it to 54% negative adjustment because it doesn't make sense anymore.
Say that again.
Well, what I'm trying to, like, scaling to me seems like it has to be a logical methodology. We
Sure.
can't incentivize certain things. We can do that, like we talked about with rebates or, you know, incentive programs that we want to address this with, right? But saying we can't defend the number below 970, really, in a logical scale is the question.
Well, if I wanted to play devil's advocate with you, I would say that you have other rules that determine how low someone can go in square footage. So your SDC won't. You could have an SDC that scales all the way to 0. That doesn't mean that someone's gonna be allowed to build something that's 5 square feet, because you have other rules.
Yeah.
And those other rules this is total policy decision now, those other rules you may decide are enough.
Well, in this case, I feel like the question is 970 close enough?
That's what I'm trying to get at.
I think where this gets confusing is, and again, I may be speaking out of school, but there are two ways to approach this, right? There is the average resident size portion, right? And then there is a $1 per square foot charge, right? Both share the same maximum, can't go beyond a certain amount, right? But you can charge as small amount as you want, right, for an SDC, as long as you have a methodology, right? So if you want to charge a $1 per square foot charge, right, then you can go smaller than 970 square feet, because you're no longer using the resident, right, as the sort of the measurement factor. You're using square foot charge.
And along with that, is there some detrimental aspect to the developer or to the city staff by making it that specific?
And again, I'll defer to Dustin on this, but just from an administration standpoint, trying to create parameters like this seem to be a little bit administratively easier to manage. I do think you will run into a situation where if you're charging on a $1 per square foot basis and there is a field change that changes it by 50 square feet, we're in a situation where we're either sort of rebating an SDC that was already collected or having to go back and charge an additional SDC. So and then obviously that also incurs that, you know, who's monitoring that over time, right? So
when we have people looking for, sorry.
No.
When we have people looking for funds in a developer, we do want to try to narrow it and make it as predictable as possible. So all of a sudden, you know, said builder comes in with, you know, a half dozen 1,200 square foot homes and they end up coming out at 2,000 square foot or something, and performance comes along. We'd be looking to adjust that. And so it can be its discretion and its flexibility can kind of sometimes feels like a moving target to people. Currently the code is not going to allow us to, like, we won't assess an SDC based on an addition. As long as it doesn't create new dwelling units. We'd be looking for, if you're gonna start scaling this to where different units start jumping tiers, we would need to change that to kind of harmonize. Because at this point, what we wouldn't want to happen is someone come in and get their SDCs at 1,200 and then have subsequent building and that, you know, because this fee is adjusted to be, you know, preferential to the smaller units and to incentivize that. We wouldn't want to create expectations or loopholes that allowed somebody to come in at 800 and then do an 800 square foot addition and an 800 square foot addition.
I've traveled to countries where the rebar always sticks out of the top of the building.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, it's not finished, and so you don't pay taxes. Granted,
Earlier we had asked the question, could they get back to us with, instead of this as a table, this as represented in an equation? And that may answer or clarify a lot of these questions regarding the adjustment from average, ignore that part. And it also will get us out of the box of setting perceived arbitrary numbers that create tiered categories that people have to fall into or not, that they're going to be trying to build to an exact number to try to fit a particular house to, in order to meet these particular SDC numbers. If we were to pursue an equation which is based on square foot or whatever, staff can let us know how difficult it would be to administer. We can definitely control for change orders, I would imagine. That we could get staff feedback on that possibility. But I would imagine that a formula for these fees would be a much easier approach, because any big builder can just say, here's my square footage, run through the equation, these are my SDCs, no matter what they choose to build, be it big, small, whatever it is. That's their choice. They can go do that.
I think my only concern on a formulaic basis that is tied to square footage is what we just discussed, right? And then there are field changes, there are drafting changes right there. And so I am a little bit concerned, and maybe I'm alone on this, but I'm a little bit concerned that every sort of plan check, right, is going to be associated with an updated SDC estimate, right? And so just the extra work in that, sort of whether that's perceived or actual. I would also say that as an example, this original table as presented from FCS only had two sort of tiers between 970 and 2000, and we thought that wasn't sufficient, right? That it did not capture what we felt was a sort of the type of product that could be offered, right? And so the other alternative that's not discussed here is we can change the tiers, right? Or we can add a tier, right? If you feel that there's a square footage here that's not sort of accurately represented, or one that the city wants to target.
That's still just creating more tiers within the same structure.
It does create more tiers, right? But it also does provide sort of it does provide a band of flexibility, right? As it relates to that you're not calculating SDCs or recalculating SDCs until it's sort of tripped the tier, right? So.
How many tiers would we like to trip? Oh, okay.
Yeah, no. So that's
the question that we have to address. And my question is, how much work or stress is it, and how best can we control from that from an administrative side? I would imagine that there are things we can do to control for that on our end as staff that would help us get through that process easier. And if there are any of those, please let us know what they are. You don't have to answer that now. The time to think about it, but that would be helpful. I believe that'd be helpful for us to make a decision.
Okay.
I'd like to know how much interest there is for addressing this topic with an equation with more tiers versus this. Briefly, Mark.
I think that the scaling is the important part, and my suggestion is we ask staff to go and come back and say, is an equation easier to implement, or do they have tiers for fears, fears for tiers? And would they like to have it that way?
Quick question. This sort of thing's being done in Washington, right?
By law.
By law.
They have, in Washington, they have three choices for scaling: square footage, which works the best for most things; number of bedrooms, which we feel might be gameable; and then thirdly, trip generation. So, your transportation SDC is already, compliant on that thing. But yeah, those are your three choices in Washington.
And where is an equation like we're discussing being implemented to your knowledge?
Gosh. The first time someone says, oh, I really prefer it this way, was the Willamette Lane Park and Rec District down in Springfield. They said, this is much simpler. And I thought, yeah, by golly, it is. I mean, we love that idea. We kind of assumed that most of our clients kind of wanted to see something like this, and some of them do. But there's a lot.
I could see there would be a consumer complaint about the formula. They're like, what am I gonna, like, this is easy to understand.
Yes, absolutely.
Right, well, I mean, I'm more in favor of the scaling as presented by staff report.
This one right here. All right, Ben?
I honestly don't really have your opinion on this. I feel like I need to hear more from staff.
Yeah, I'm open to what staff thinks is most workable, especially in the long term. I in this conversation, and maybe they tell us something different when they come back, but I think I'm leaning towards some level of tiering for simplicity.
Great. Grant, what, you sort of kicked this off. What do you have, are you open to all three of those ideas? Equation, this scaling, more scaling.
Either way, it's the same math. You still have to do a trip generation report, still have to count up how many square feet you have. It's just plugging the same numbers into the different tool. It doesn't matter.
I assert it does matter. If there was an 800 on this page, it would affect our policy.
Well, from my perspective, it doesn't matter. It's not just my perspective. We do, if we want to perhaps, and I don't know if this is appropriate or not, we do have a builder in the audience if we wish to call an expert opinion about this and ask somebody who does this every day.
Good. Wondering how, we may be running out of time on this before we include more people, so no offense, Mike, but thank you. I'm gonna set expectations now. I would love to give staff council direction on the scaling question tonight, even if we don't get to the rest of
this topic, because we do have other things and.
Yeah. Let me, I guess, in trying to make this easier, it sounds to me that there is the desire to have the scaling reflect developments that are below 970 square feet and provide an additional discount, maybe up to 800 square feet or so, right? And for there to be somewhat of a more formulaic, process, whether that sort of ends up being in tiers or whether it ends up being an equation, that sort of makes it easier to administrate.
How did folks like the Chris paragraph we just heard? Yeah? Yeah, you got it.
Okay.
Okay, remind me what's left to decide.
This is the tough one. I think, well, so actually we can make this easier. So staff has proposed a 5-year phase-in. So the options are, no phase-in and go to the maximum, a different methodology on the phase-in, a shorter phase-in, 3 years is also common, right? So 3, 5.
Let's check and see if we have a violent agreement on this. Have you guys thought this through? What number you like?
Fine with what's proposed, especially with significant increase like this, I think.
I think 5 years is good. I like how it's presented. However, I will caveat that by saying that one thing that I do have in my mind is, as Will works with incentive programs, et cetera, I know he's working with developers, et cetera. Something that was said earlier that gives me, concern to be looked at more is, does it impede financing, having a program like that? Because it takes us X amount of months to get that approved internally or something. So I would just direct staff, if we're going to be offering said incentive programs, that we make them easy to not just implement, but to demonstrate for the purposes of financing, et cetera, that the city's giving you this money back immediately, or however just time to decide whatever those programs are. And that's why I personally am okay with what's presented here, because I think there's a lot of ways to attack getting the type of housing that we want through those methodologies.
No.
I was gonna say, Will has been part of this process. The residential scaling part of it, I think, is important, his incentive. And he's run sort of his financing proposals, based on what the new SDC rates would be. So this has all been incorporated in sort of his design and input.
Awesome, thank you.
I guess before even the phase-in question. I'm, you know, especially with some of these, 275% increase in transportation SDC, some of these other ones. I agree with the methodology. It is this balance of obviously things we need to pay for, need to get paid for, and this is, the main route for it, but it does feel very counter to a lot of our other goals around actually having, more residential development and having more housing, and so I don't have any basis to decide a number of, do we go to the maximum allowable cap or something less, but it feels like we haven't really talked about that, so I want to put that out there. Certainly with the increase, like, yes, 5-year phase-in, the longer the phase-in, the better for folks to have a warning. I do have a concern with the current staff methodology where it's fairly large increases and then kind of, does this tail off, which somewhat feels like defeating the purpose of a 5-year phase-in, like where the last year is like, oh, it's an $100 increase instead of 2,000, so why do you have an extra year? So I'd kind of rather see like more set increments of, if you need to raise it by 5,000 over 5 years, increase it by 1,000 every year instead of large increases at the start and then small, getting smaller and smaller. So that, yeah, I guess that's where I'm at.
Thank you. Mark?
I like the 5-year phase-in as well. I think that there's some, you guys sharpening your pencil and seeing, what is the shape of it is a good idea. And then I think that the incentives for barrier management are really important, but I think it's a different discussion.
Thank you. Greg?
I agree with my fellow councilors that 5 years seems an appropriate time to phase in. I also agree that we can bend the curve as we agree to make it. I understand the math that you did, Chris. So it makes sense to me, but if we want to use a more flatline method, that's also fine too. I'm indifferent to which method we choose to phase in that 5 years. A concern that I have about this amount going to the maximum is I understand that these fees will be going into public works that we need to get done, and we need to get these public works done to serve our community. Entirely makes sense. The difficult part is going to be that as we tack all of these services onto developers, and in this case solely developers, they're going to pass this cost on through their construction and development onto those folks buying homes. It will marginally increase construction costs, increasing housing prices, and we will conversely be acting against ourselves, and by increasing SDCs, increase the cost of housing, increase the price of housing here. It's increasing the asset value of housing in Hood River by increasing SDCs. So in that respect, we're working against ourselves. We can choose to address some of those things long-term in what we choose to spend those SDCs on. However, we need to be highly judicious, us and future councils, I hope, are highly judicious in what we choose to spend those SDCs on. As you've heard in our presentation, a number of other communities have really high SDCs that they choose to spend on transportation, for example, or what was the other one? Water. We choose to develop those sorts of systems. They cost us a lot of money. They will continue to cost us a lot of money. They will continue to increase our cost of living and our housing cost. Those are choices we all make. We don't have to make those choices, but we do. So that's in my view is the rock and a hard place that we're stuck against right now, unfortunately. Hopefully we can make better choices So future generations don't have to make them. And we're not stuck paying for poor decisions of the past and having to play catch up as we are now. So that's my only concern with running right up to the maximum, is making a similar mistake and working against ourselves in that respect.
Grant, I guess, can you clarify what, for water or transportation, like what you think we shouldn't be building, or?
That's a bigger debate, and it's not germane to the SDC discussion, I think, at this time.
I think it's important to never to avoid conflating. If the costs might go up, it doesn't mean there's magically one more person in Seattle, no offense, Seattle, who's going to buy that house. Like, if the cost to build it goes up, it doesn't mean the market will buy it. The market's going to buy what they can afford. And so building costs do not set the price of housing. I think that's important. I like Megan's idea of changing the reference point on the increase, the 5-year increase, so that it isn't like, if that last year's nothing and it all was back in the first year. Like, let's do it so that we steal some of that from the last year and put it into the first year. Somebody had their hand up. Doug.
And, the way that I'm thinking about this is, and I think it's intrinsically going to be part of the conversation, is, with urban renewal, we can say that if we are doing the ceiling, and doing this 5-year increase and have the scale and everything that we have, we can further look at that and say, well, to incentivize medium-sized housing or missing middle housing or whatever, we can shave that off for a developer to incentivize them to keep prices lower and not raise prices. So hopefully the expensive homes are getting more expensive, and the ones in the middle, or whatever we choose, or whatever our the types of housing we need, we can incentivize. So okay.
Mark and then Grant.
I would also point out that council sort of sets the direction of the ship, and with things that we learn, if we see the curve starting to bend, we have the ability to change it. So I think this is a good plan, and then future councils are going to decide if that's still the right tool to have in the toolbox.
Just two quick things. I also agree with indexing it to inflation. Too many people have not done that with a broad number of things in the past, and it's created many long-term problems. One other concern that I have is if we're going to agree to go up to the max, for example, I am curious about what that does to generally private financing of buildings, and making sure that we can meet the needs of our builders to make sure that they can build the housing stock that we desire them to build as well.
I want to understand, Grant, are you imagining that staff will get us some answers to that, or?
Yes.
Staff, how's that feel as an assignment? I'm sorry, Chris. What?
I would probably have to have a conversation to understand sort of how the financing approaches SDCs.
I'd suggest we might be able to find some national or state data. I think that would be really hard to find local data. Our number is just so small.
And
just to clarify on that, going through the financing process and building your capital stack, it's straightforward, predictable process that we've all go through often enough, but you should be able to walk through it with a builder. They should be able to put you guys in pretty easily with the ratios and percentages that they have to hit given different development types and that sort of thing. And what's expected of them from any bank that they might go to.
So that was our comments. Chris, does this give you direction on what?
I think so. The last one's a little unclear, but I'll I'll handle that offline.
I guess I have one question, is like, is that a assignment that council wants to give to staff? And two, and my second is, do you need that in order to make some decisions, or is that just more of a?
Thank you, that'd be very
Academic
helpful. So I need reaction.
Just kind of,
from other
what's my
councilors
timeline?
For Grant's idea about sort of financeability impacts of this SDC scheme. Folks want staff to research that for us. Yeah, something, yes, no, works.
This is definitely not an area I know a lot about, but I think if there's some clear threshold answer of, oh, if and I'm gonna make up numbers and a rule that probably is not right, but if SDCs go over 25,000, something breaks. I think that's good for us to know. I'm imagining it's much more gray and loose and not thresholdy, so maybe less feasible, but if there's not too much staff time spent to try and find something out, I think that's helpful.
Others? Mark?
Again, I think we set a path and then we're gonna learn, and that we don't need to ask staff to do that at this point, because after the first year, we can say, okay, how did that go? And council can adjust or pull in data, or the builder community can be providing data. Because what's the state of our incentive program, and does it make this moot? I think there's a lot of things we don't know, and that we're gonna know more as we approach it, and that's the time to make adjustments.
Ben?
Yeah, this kind of brings up a couple of questions. One, you know, is there, because it seems like we're kind of developing a lot of questions and some uncertainty here. Is there like a certain amount of time that is there some sort of time ticking, you know, clock here in terms of we need to get this done, you know? So that's question number one in terms of timeliness, like. And two, you know, we put this into place and, you know, we start, you know, thinking, oh, maybe this, you know, wasn't we want to change some things or something like that, like how long, like, we locked into anything here in terms of like a timeline, or like when this could be revisited again, which I'm sure we don't want to do because clearly this takes some work. But, you know, I'm just curious about the time sensitive nature or not time sensitive nature of any of this.
I would think from the timeliness, obviously, the city has reviewed its SDCs on a really irregular schedule. There's nothing that says they have to be done at a certain point. I do think Chris, as your leadership team, really do want to get these on a regular schedule. I think it makes it more predictable, and we won't have those like big catch-ups that we're trying to do now. I would say, just from a practical point of view, this council will have some membership changes in January. I don't want to restart this process with some new members, so I encourage you to finish this up by the end of the year. That said, if you have reservations, you absolutely could take a pause, do more research, come back in January, but we would have to start some of this over with some newer members. And then how to change it. I think you would, I mean, a current council can never really bind a future council. So you would pass resolutions that indicate the direction you want us to take. A future council could rescind those resolutions by passing new ones and setting new direction for staff. So I don't think that's particularly hard to do. It's an effort. You would need to, like, you know, Dan and Chris and whoever would need to rewrite new resolutions, but we do that somewhat frequently, so that's not hard. And Chris, Doug, do you have anything to add to that?
No. I would assert that for some people's business model or pro forma or, you know, cash reserves, this will have this amount of impact, and for others, it will have a lot of impact. If you're quite extended, the financing conditions and the economy makes a difference, and whoops, I should have been more aggressive, or whoops, I should have been more conservative, and it's not black and white thing. Doug?
I just want to echo what Mark said. From my perspective, I agree. I don't need that specific to move forward, and you know, Yeah, I guess that's what the question was.
So I'm not hearing a majority to instruct staff to research the financeability implications of this. Yeah? All right. What else do you need from us, Chris?
I think that's the direction I need.
Awesome. This is so interesting. It's sounding so wonderful.
Are we done with this topic then, maybe?
For today.
We're gonna take a break.
Over there. I'm gonna watch me save. Yeah, right. Abigail, Elena has something she needs to give you. And there's two shots. Yes, you can.
Jen, are we ready?
Yes.
Good, we're back. We have next item, the consent agenda.
I move we approve the consent agenda.
By Paulson,
Second.
second by Saunders. Discussion. I have some discussion. I called Grant and Doug last week because I drove through Bingen and saw the darlingest mural. And I was like, props to you guys for repping the like artistic license side of the argument. And I'm not saying we did the wrong thing, but darn, we're missing some good murals, I'm sure. That's all. Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Chair votes aye, motion passes. Discussion items, development code, Dustin.
Thank you, Mayor and councilors. You recall this work is included in the council's 23-24 work plan as a critical project. Last spring, we started working on the first phase, an audit of Title 16 and 17 of the municipal code. The second phase of the project, the code update, is expected to begin in early 2025. We're joined tonight on the line by Matt Hasty of consulting firm MIG. When we met you in a work session in July, Matt presented feedback received during meetings with interested parties, as well as initial code audit findings. Tonight, we'd like to share initial recommendations based on the code audit, as well as a public engagement plan for phase 2 of the project. The documents, including a DEI assessment that was used to inform the engagement plan, are in your packet, beginning with a cover sheet on page 86. I'll hand things over to Matt, who has some slides to share. Matt, are you going to share from your position? Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I'll give that a shot right now. All right, can y'all see that okay? And can you hear me?
Yes and yes.
Excellent. Okay. All right. Well, thanks for having me. Good to see y'all there on the screen. And I'm going to go through this relatively quickly. I know it's gotten fairly late and I don't want to keep you longer than you need to be there. But I'll be happy to answer any questions y'all have after the presentation. So do a really quick recap of the project goals, just talk about quickly where we are in this process, this code audit process. I'm going to talk very generally about the code recommendations because we presented, as Kevin said, some of the specifics of that at the last meeting in terms of the findings from the code audit. I do want to talk about the engagement plan that we've identified or drafted for the next phase of this work for the code update and talk through that a little bit and kind of get your feedback on that. So I'll have a few questions for you at the end of my presentation. It's pretty brief in terms of the number of slides, and then I'll just do a quick wrap up with next steps. So that's what we'll do. So just again, quick recap on the objectives. You've seen this before, but really just making the code easier to use and understand and administer for you all, for Planning Commission, for staff is pretty important. Making sure that housing standards, including statewide legislation, are addressed and that those standards are clear and objective. Super important, both of those things. And making sure that when we're updating the code, we're doing that in an equitable and inclusive way, both in terms of how the code may impact community members in Hood River, but also in terms of how we're managing the process. So again, we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So for this phase 1 audit, we're getting pretty close to the end of this part of the process. You know, we've gone through this iterative process of reviewing the code, describing issues associated with the development code, talking to folks about it, getting their opinions, reviewing things with you. So kind of near the end, but it's really kind of the beginning of what would be the next phase of the process, the code update. So we've got a draft report that starts to lay out recommendations for how we would approach the code update based on what we found in the code audit. See if you have any thoughts on any of those initial recommendations tonight. See if we hear back. We've shared those recommendations with folks that we talked to earlier in stakeholder interviews. So see what we hear back from folks and you, and then we may make some changes to those recommendations based on all that. And then that sort of sets the stage, along with the engagement plan we've started to draft for the phase 2, sets the stage for that next phase of work. So it's kind of where we are. So again, I'm going to really kind of hit the code recommendations at a pretty high level, but then again, I'll be happy to answer questions and just take comments from y'all when I'm done with the presentation here. So this is really kind of a framework for the code update. It identifies how we expect to approach that, and does that sort of, it's organized by the different chapters and sections of your code. And it builds on the code audit findings. In a number of cases, there are some different options or alternatives in terms of how we approach certain improvements to the code. So in those cases, we've identified kind of a project team recommendation, staff and consulting team recommendation. If you have any thoughts on any of those recommendations, we're interested in hearing that tonight. That report is not intended to be inclusive of all the things we've done in the audit or all the things we will do in the code update. Again, we hit things at kind of a high level. So there's a bunch of additional detail in the earlier code audit reports. And when we dig into the code itself in the code update phase, there will be more details that we'll address. So just kind of want to make sure that that's clear, because, you know, it's a fairly, I'll call it a fairly brief document at 12 or 13 pages. So didn't want to cover every single detail there. And it will build on the conversations we've had with you all, with the interested parties that we talked to earlier in the process, Planning Commission and others, and further conversations we'll have with those folks in part of the code update process. Kevin and Dustin and I used a lot of car repair analogies when we were talking about this code update earlier in the process. So I don't hear any guffaws around the table, but we wanted to get a little car repair image in here. The way we sort of describe this would be kind of a frame up rebuild. You know, I think one of the things we heard from folks we talked to earlier in the process is that your code does have some good bones. It's got some good structure. We're not going to just sort of toss everything. So we are likely to retain a lot of the basic structure of the code and the existing standards where they make sense, where they're clear and objective, where they're still meeting the community's needs. We would retain those. But there are some sections we're likely to, or we recommend reorganizing and or replacing. There's some new sections we're going to need to create, in part to address things like affordable housing and some of the state legislation that's occurred around that. And then there's going to be a lot of sort of, I'll call them smaller scale revisions to other sections of the code. So it's going to be a pretty substantial rebuild, but not like your code's not totaled, I guess, though, is the way I would put it. But pretty significant changes. So, and I think that's reflected in the code recommendations report that you got and in some of the earlier audit work. So I'm going to switch gears a little bit here, just keep the car analogies going, and talk about the code update engagement strategy. That was another one of the documents that we sent you all. Just kind of first talk about objectives to that, and kind of go through these fairly quickly, but address barriers to participation, make sure that we're conducting some targeted meetings with Spanish-speaking community members, using graphics wherever we can to illustrate, to explain what we're talking about, because development codes are inherently complicated and pretty wonky things. You know, wherever you've got relationships with existing community groups, we want to leverage those. Make sure that when we're talking to people and we hear things from them, we circle back to them and tell them what we did with that input, how that input or how those comments helped inform and shaped the recommendations that we'll ultimately put forward. Want to make sure that we're achieving the city's goals for diversity, equity, and inclusion. We had a diversity, equity, and inclusion assessment built into this phase of the process, and we have one built into the next phase as well. And as part of that, identify, are there ways in which we think the development code might adversely or differentially affect different groups of folks within the community. So that's something that's important. And ensuring transparency, that's partly kind of what I said a moment ago about making sure people understand what we're doing with their input. If we're asking a question, make sure we're telling people how we've used the answers. So those are some of the overall objectives. Some of the folks we want to make sure, community groups or populations that we're working with or engaging with in that code update process, Latino residents and other communities of color, builders and developers, including affordable housing developers and advocacy groups, accessibility advocacy organizations and individuals. I'm sorry to just kind of read this, but I'm gonna do that with this slide. Other advocacy and interest groups, older residents and younger residents, agencies that you all partner with in terms of providing public services. Obviously you all, as well as the Planning Commission, as well as the City Landmarks Review Board, and staff and other departments who intersect with the code on a regular basis. So those are, similar to the code audit. Those are some of the groups we want to make sure that we're engaging with in the code update process. And then finally, just some of the techniques we plan to use and we've described in that code update engagement plan, just in terms of broadly letting folks out there know we're conducting this process and there's information available to review using your project website. Also using targeted email and other lists for interested parties. Meeting with you regularly. You'll see, you'll see in the phase 2 engagement plan, a fair bit on meetings, work sessions with the council and planning commission. We've incorporated, similar to the code audit process, meetings with Spanish-speaking community members. We've plugged in an online survey and the ability for people to just provide comments in that way. And then we also think it might be worthwhile to produce some kind of short, these are not going to be like super, I will say, high production value, but some short explanatory videos to help people just kind of understand what we're doing and what we're talking about. And we actually think that's probably a more effective way to explain things than having a community meeting where we make people come and listen to us for a couple hours, on our time instead of their time. So those, and then social media communications, mostly just to get the word out about what we're doing and when we're doing it and how we're doing it, as opposed to sort of a dialogue on social media. We do think it's an important way to let people know about stuff, but maybe sometimes less of an effective way to have a dialogue with folks. So, so those are some of the activities, or those are the activities we have identified or included in that engagement strategy. So that's my pretty quick presentation. I think, and these are the questions we have for you all. And then happy to take any questions you have for me or for Dustin or Kevin, but want to get a sense of, based on that document we sent you and what I've said, do you support that proposed engagement strategy for phase 2? Does that make sense? To the extent you have an opinion where you've looked at the different options in the code recommendations memo, do you support where we landed? Usually there were a couple of options and we recommended one of them. Any comments beyond that on the information in the code recommendations memo? And what else do we need to be thinking about as we plan for the code update for phase 2 of this process? So those are my questions to you. And happy to take any other comments or questions y'all might have for me. So maybe I'll leave this slide up for a little bit, but also be sort of ready to jump into the document if you have specific questions.
Thank you, Matt. Great.
Yeah.
Who wants to start? Megan.
And I'm gonna just start with number 1 versus all 4, or do you want me to?
However you
Cover
want to
everything.
do it is fine with me. Yeah.
Sorry, Matt, I'm talking to the mayor.
Oh, sorry.
Okay. well, for simplicity, engagement strategy. I really like the large diversity of different ways to try and reach out to folks. I think that's a struggle the city's always had, is there's no one way. So the many options is good. I'm really excited for, if I read it correctly, there's kind of some adaptive management of figuring out what things were most successful and focusing on that. And so I'd definitely be interested in hearing, as you go and learn, like what is and isn't working. And honestly, from the city's end, maybe we can incorporate that into our future engagement. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks a bunch. I'm super excited that you guys are gonna get through this, so that's great. Going down through all four, I guess. For the engagement strategy, I think it's fine. I would question the bullets on page 105 and sort of their emphasis. I think that the other departments in the city, especially engineering and building, you know, have a bigger impact than just being the second from the bottom type thing. I'm assuming, I'm reading into this that there's some level of priority. And then lastly, that the builder community really needs to be emphasized, I think, separate, you know, with more emphasis than just one of a bunch of these things, because, you know, they're the folks that are gonna be most impacted, and making sure that we really get their input is critical. So that, but generally, you know, I wouldn't take any of those bullets off, and I like the general plan. On the suggested options, I think that everything that you guys suggested looked good to me. For initial code recommendations, the only thing that I wrote notes on was in 16.12 and 17.17, which are development standards, and things that I've seen in my time here is like a consistent struggle with building height stuff, and just where is that, and it should be consistent. And when we did cottage code, we said, okay, this is different, but when next time we come around, we're gonna make it all super consistent. So that's one. Sidewalks, we've had some discussions at council level that is there really sort of a big picture plan, as opposed to just saying that every house needs to have a sidewalk. Can we refer to a side document or something that says, you know, you might not need a sidewalk if you're on a neighborhood street, but you should pay into the kitty that's going to pay for sidewalks somewhere else, maybe. I don't know how to do it. And then lastly, tree protection is something that I always really liked. And then we just see that it just gets run over in practicality. So I'd like to see within the design standards some, or development standards, some tree protections that have bite as well as bark.
Some, maybe just a couple quick responses. First, I think the bullets on page 105 are not necessarily meant to be in priority order. For example, I wouldn't say, you know, Latino residents are like the least important of those groups. So we probably should have said that, you know, in that document.
I think that since people are going to be reading it, Matt, I think that they will assume it's in priority order.
Yeah,
so
we should be clear about that. Yeah. And great comments on the other items. Those are also things that both your staff have brought up, Dustin and Kevin, as well as some of the folks that we talked to in the interested parties meetings. Yeah, so appreciate all those comments. Thank you. As well as from the first counselor. Sorry.
Megan.
I mean, I guess if we're doing all four, I'll just code recommendations. I generally agreed with everything. I liked the, you know, when there were multiple options, I think I agreed with all of the choices as recommended. I did really want to call out, this is what was recommended, so I'm super excited. But for you know, and it was like 3 different places, the middle housing code of not incorporating it and keeping it separate, so that we are continuing to provide, even if they change a bit, to be more clear and objective, or match state law in different ways, like having that developer benefit or the density bonus or whatever it is that really incentivizes the housing types that we were trying to incentivize with that code. So I'm glad to see that was already the recommendation, and I just want to throw my weight into that as well. And I don't think I had anything else, so thank you.
Thank you.
Good.
Nothing really to add. I'd say based on what Mark and Megan have said, I support the strategy for phase 2, excited about it. Where there were options, I didn't have any notes about anything that I disagreed with between the different options. No further comments, and nothing else to add in addition to what the previous 2 counselors have said about anything else to think about. Yeah, excited to move to the next phase.
Awesome. Thank you.
Ben? That's it.
right.
Wait.
Oh, yeah.
I thought you did.
Like, I'm okay, yeah. We got 2 thumbs up from the ends, Matt. You couldn't
Excellent.
See that never.
All
So,
right.
That's the
reaction from council to this slide.
Excellent. Well, thank you.
What are you laughing at?
Appreciate the comments and glad to hear we're on the right track in most of those cases. So that's great. Yeah. Do you have any other questions for me?
I feel like
We're good.
not to sound, not doing the homework or being disengaged, but the important step here, in my opinion, is that we're taking the time for the smart folks to take a look at this thing that's been sitting around for a long time. And you're going to notice the reasonable and important things. And that's really important.
So
I move that we direct staff to proceed with phase 2 of the development code audit
Process and the public engagement plan.
Moved by Paulson.
Second.
Second by Doug. Now, did we take a little quantum leap there? Are we okay? Is everybody on board with this? All in favor?
Yes.
Aye.
Opposed? Chair votes aye, motion passes. Thank you all for the, don't confuse the quick treatment for lack of, this is, so important and overdue, and so glad they gave us money to do this needed thing.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you very much. Good to see
Matt.
you. Take care.
Okay, that takes us to city manager comments.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, yeah, we got to, Matt, we got to
Yeah, I've got
unshare
to
Matt somehow.
unshare. I lose
Oh,
track.
we
Oh, there it
hijacked
is.
it.
Sorry. Okay. Got her. Sorry about that.
Thanks, Matt.
Took me a minute. Yep.
Thanks for doing this.
Bye-bye.
Okay. City manager, please.
Thank you, Mayor. I, Councilor Polson and Councilor Rivera will all be at the League of Oregon City Conference in Bend,
Thanks for
starting
taking the time.
tomorrow. I'm leaving tomorrow night up through Saturday. You might be able to make it till Thursday, but I have meetings on Wednesday night.
Where is it?
It's in Bend. Yeah. Other upcoming things, MCED has a symposium on November 1st.
Is anybody going?
I highly recommend it. I think it's really
I
fantastic.
know, it's just this question.
I believe Councilor Rivera is also planning to attend.
I'm not prioritizing, I'm just like.
She talked to me about it on Friday. We can talk.
Okay,
So,
I'm
Yep.
glad some of us are going, I'm trying to figure out, I don't wanna skip
Yep.
the other thing.
Another opportunity for you is MCAC is having a housing stabilization summit on November 13th and 14th. I can forward that to you. I've attended in the past. Normally it's been one day. About half of it is social service focused, and then about half of it is policy focused. So you might wish to attend, just the policy if you're limited for time, but MCAC does excellent work and they're important partners. So it's good for us to have some folks there. Hood River 101 graduation will be at your next meeting on October 28th. Thanks to all of you who have participated. Councilor Mitchell has been there, Councilor Polson, Zamuller, Rivera, had a really great time. The mayor brought his banjo to the first session. Been super fun. Tomorrow will be police, and then I think the final night will be the planning department. So it's been a really great group of people, super positive. It's been really fun. So thank you all for that. And then my last thing is MCED convenes a group called EDGE, the Economic Development Group, of which is the cities, the ports, community college, Visit Hood River, school district, yes, they attend, and then Business Oregon, a couple others. So we meet every other month. And that group, in conversation, particularly with the county, is going to take on more of a coordinating role with ODOT Region 1 Act. So Councilor Polson and others attend the Region 1 Act group representing Hood River County. We want to make sure that we give him and others the information they need, and that we as cities and ports, we're all really coordinating together, not in competition when we go to ODOT. So I just bring that up as we've taken on that task, a little bit more coordination. So we're working with Chair Ewer from the county as really being our point person, but we've taken that on. And right now, MCED is coordinating nominations for new members of the Region 1 Act. So we have a city seat. Councilor Colson has that seat right now, but there's a business seat. There's also an at-large seat that the county appoints, and they've asked MCED to run that process for them. So they are currently taking applications. It's open till I think November 13th. So you know folks or anybody online who would be interested in representing Hood River County.
Can you get us something written about that?
Yep, I'll follow up with an email and a link to the application site. Yeah, great. I think that's it. Thank you. Oh, Councilor Polson's looking.
We want to do the alternative.
So I talked to Councilor Polson about appointing an alternate to the city seat.
For what? You're unable to attend.
Right. I think I want to follow up with a little bit more because officially by the bylaws, I think only the county seat has an alternate. We could maybe have an alternate, but they would not be able to vote, which I don't know how much voting happens there or not, but that was something I just learned today. So, yeah. But more information to come.
Committee reports, Ben, don't have one yet.
Still, we're gonna keep calling on you though until there's a committee for Ben. Doug.
None to report.
Megan. Mark. Grant.
I had a Region 1 Act meeting. It's trying, man. It's trying to get you there. I don't have anything really groundbreaking to report from it. So no new exciting news from the Region 1 Act. Everything new, Abigail just talked about. So yeah, exciting.
We had the United Way Gala. We raised almost $250,000. Pretty fun night. Really important community partner, making keeping the wheels, running in basic human services in a wide range of areas, and people volunteering and feeling good, and happy about that. Mayor comments. We have to decide about Thanksgiving week. Council President and I are both out of town. It's kind of a question of whether there's work to do, but it's kind of a question of whether we can muster up, what are y'all's Thanksgiving plans?
I'd be around.
Will be.
I'll be here.
I will also be here.
Okay, so we got 3 in person. Grant, in person. So we got 4 in person, 2 remote. Don't know about Gladys. I think it's best to not chair remote, so Councilor Saunders has done it before. Sounds like we have a meeting.
And that's on the 25th.
Right, that's the Monday before Thanksgiving.
Right.
Okay, we will set an agenda. Well,
And confirming, we will not be meeting on Christmas Eve.
that's correct.
So we got another one, we got, November's normal, and December has just the one.
Correct, although November,
Veterans Day, so it's Tuesday again.
yes,
Man, the Tuesday throws me off.
it does make for a shorter week.
I just don't want to show up at stuff on Wednesday on accident. It's whoops, it's not Tuesday. That's me. Council comments, Grant.
Just an aside that I forgot to mention about the Region 1 Act meeting. Kat had a bunch of applications and we got a vote on that, so that's nice. I don't have any other council comments.
I'm sorry, Cat had applications for what?
For grants, grants and funding from Oregon funds. I don't have anything today.
I have one more thing I forgot. There's a bunch of public engagement opportunities. Jackie emailed us. There's 3 trunk or treats. There's Halloween night, and then there's Dia de los Muertos coming up. So I just think it's nice to show up to stuff. I'm going to be at several of those. And somebody replied, maybe Gladys replied about her dates and when she could and couldn't. So just, you know, opportunities to be at gatherings. I think it's a fun thing. And you can see my shark onesie if you come to Halloween. Megan.
I have nothing. I wasn't sure if we wanted to talk about the kids request or is that for a future meeting?
Let's talk about that. Thank you. I heard them say requesting 5 storm drains to lay down some paint, right? Is that what I heard?
Yeah.
Thoughts?
And that was just the stencil, like spray paint?
I think so.
I think that was a stencil that they would spray paint. I've seen, you know, flows to bay, blah, 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 like.
I installed the little middle ones.
Oh, right, you were. Let me recount, we're in this, man, keep going.
Well, but that was the previous job, but anyway, yeah, five stencils feels achievable if staff thinks that's a reasonable use of an hour, maybe.
Right, because we have to have one of Adam's people go along with them.
Yeah, I have, Adam was watching the meeting, he and I have communicated while we were talking, we'll talk tomorrow morning. I did give my business card to all of the children as they left, asking them to send me a little bit more detail. Like, I don't know if they had particular areas in town that they had hoped, or if they wanted to do the painting themselves, or whatever the question might be. So I will get more detail from them, but I'm hearing a general positive, like, let's try to accommodate that.
That's what I'm hearing.
Great.
Thank you.
Doug?
Not much for me. I've been having a lot of conversations with constituents, business owners, et cetera, about the sort of Lyft and Uber, TNC's discussion. I would encourage you to reach out to a lot of people. I think we were hoping to gain a lot of feedback from the business community, from the constituents, et cetera, about the response to this summer, but just in general, as you inform your decision. But I've been having a lot of coffees on this, so help me out with that too, is my request. Thank you.
Ben?
Since last council meeting, went to the Hood River 101 in Spanish, wastewater treatment plant. It's a great experience. Group was super nice people. And, you know, very interested in the different elements of the city, and the wastewater treatment plant was particularly interesting. Obviously not a place I'd ever been before. Was kind of surprised at just the size of it and how complex it is. And the UV light was cool. I was down there roasting all the bacteria or whatever. I don't know. And still, and got a tour of the fire department as I'm still going, you know, kind of going through my long, you know, onboarding process. And then I have some more tours next week. Forget the departments off the top of my head, but I know I have police left, urban renewal, and one more, administration, I think. Yeah, so that's it for me.
I just had this thought flash through my head, like, you're absolutely gonna be learning stuff in your onboarding that, like, I guarantee all of us like missed or something. So I almost want to have like a highlight of the department that you could, but whatever. That was just an idea. Anything else for the good of the order? We are adjourned. Got my gavel back.